Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. Story 1. My name is Sarah Chen. I'm 34, and the snowstorm that hit us at Algonquin Provincial Park wasn't supposed to happen in late September. The weather forecast had promised crisp autumn nights and golden days, perfect conditions for what my husband Marcus insisted would be our healing trip in the rented RV. Instead, by our second night, fat flakes were swirling past our windows like ash from some distant fire, and something was walking across our roof with deliberate, measured steps. Marcus heard it first. I was washing dishes in our cramped kitchenette when he looked up from his laptop, head tilted like our old dog Rex used to do when he sensed something wrong. "You hear that?" I dried my hands on the dish towel, listening. Wind through the pines, the soft hiss of snow against aluminum siding, the gentle hum of our propane heater. "Hear what?" Footsteps on the roof. The sound came then, a slow, careful tread above our heads, starting from the front of the RV and moving toward the rear with unnatural precision. Not the chaotic scramble of a raccoon or the light patter of a squirrel. These were bipedal steps, heel to toe, as if someone was taking a leisurely stroll across our 28-foot Winnebago. "Probably just snow sliding off," I said, but my voice came out thinner than I'd intended. The footsteps paused directly above us, and in that silence, I could hear Marcus's breathing quicken. We'd been married 9 years, together for 12, and I knew his tells. The way his jaw tightened when he was trying not to panic. How he ran his thumb along his wedding ring when something scared him. He was doing it now, spinning that thin gold band around and around. "Snow doesn't walk, Sarah." The footsteps resumed, reaching the back of the RV before stopping altogether. Marcus rose from the dinette, moving toward the rear window with the careful precision of someone trying not to make noise. I followed, my bare feet silent on the cold linoleum. He pulled back the thin curtain just enough to peer out. The snow was coming down harder now, thick flakes that caught the glow from our exterior lights and danced like moths. Behind us, the woods pressed close, a wall of black pine and birch that seemed to lean inward, as if curious about our presence. "See anything?" I whispered. "No, but..." He let the curtain fall. "The snow's not disturbed. No footprints leading away." I pushed past him to look for myself. He was right. The snow lay pristine around our RV, unmarked except for the gentle depressions where it had accumulated against our tires. If someone had walked across our roof and jumped down, there should have been prints. Deep ones, in snow that was already 3 inches thick and getting deeper. "Maybe they went back the way they came," I suggested, but even as I said it, I knew it didn't make sense. We'd heard the footsteps travel the full length of the roof. Marcus pulled out his phone, thumb swiping to the weather app. The screen's glow made his face look pale, almost corpse-like. "This storm isn't supposed to last long. Maybe an hour or 2 of light snow. This is..." He held up the device, showing me the radar. A massive spiral of white covered half of Ontario, with us sitting directly in its bull's-eye. This shouldn't exist. I stared at the image, my breath fogging the rear window. Weather apps are wrong all the time. Not this wrong. Sarah, this storm system. It's like it appeared out of nowhere. A sharp crack from overhead made us both jump. Then another. Then a sound like something heavy sliding across the roof toward the front of the RV. "The awning," Marcus breathed. "It's going to tear off." But when we moved to the front window, the motorized awning was retracted and secure, just as we'd left it before the snow started. The sounds continued, scraping, sliding, like furniture being rearranged by invisible hands. Marcus grabbed his coat from the hook by the door. "I'm going out there." "No." The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "Marcus, no. It's almost midnight, it's snowing, and we don't know what's out there. What's out there is probably a tree branch, or ice building up and sliding around. I'm not going to lie awake all night listening to our roof get damaged." He was already pulling on his boots, that stubborn set to his jaw that I'd learned to recognize over the years. This was Marcus in fix-it mode, the same determination that had led him to rebuild our kitchen cabinets from scratch and install a hot tub in our backyard, despite having no plumbing experience. "At least take the flashlight," I said, handing him the heavy mag light from our emergency kit. "I'll be 2 minutes, just a quick walk around to see what's causing the noise." He opened the door, and a gust of frigid air swept in, carrying snowflakes that melted instantly against my warm skin. The wind howled through the gap, and for a moment, I could have sworn I heard something else beneath it. A sound like whispering, too low to make out words. "Marcus!" But he was already stepping down into the snow, the beam of his flashlight sweeping across the campsite. I watched through the window as he moved around the RV's perimeter, the light bobbing and weaving through the falling snow. He disappeared around the driver's side, then reappeared at the rear, then vanished again as he circled to check the passenger side. The footsteps on the roof started again. I pressed my face to the glass, trying to see Marcus while the sounds moved overhead. Slow, deliberate steps, just like before. But Marcus was outside. I could see the glow of his flashlight through the snow. So, who was walking on our roof? "Marcus," I called, but the wind snatched my voice away. The footsteps stopped directly above me. I tilted my head back, staring at the ceiling as if I could see through the aluminum and fiberglass to whatever waited above. A drop of condensation fell from somewhere near the air vent, landing on my cheek with a cold touch that made me flinch. The RV door opened and Marcus stumbled inside, snow crusting his dark hair and clinging to his jacket. His face was flushed with cold, but his eyes were bright with confusion. "Nothing," he said, shaking snow from his coat. "No tree branches, no ice, no sign of what could be making that noise. But Sarah—" He paused, looking up at the ceiling. The footsteps stopped as soon as I went outside. The whole time I was out there, nothing. Dead quiet, except for the wind. They started again while you were out, right above me. We stared at each other in the warm light of the RV's interior. Outside, the storm continued its assault, and something moved in the woods beyond our campsite. A shadow between the trees that was gone before I could point it out. "Maybe we should leave," I said quietly. "In this?" "Sarah, it's a whiteout. We can barely see 10 feet in any direction. Then, first thing in the morning." Marcus nodded, but I could see the reluctance in his expression. This trip had been his idea. A way to reconnect after the miscarriage 3 months ago. I'd been against it from the start. I wasn't ready to pretend that a long weekend in the woods could fix what had broken between us, but he'd been so hopeful, so determined to find some way back to the people we used to be. "First thing," he agreed. "But Sarah, I'm sure there's a logical explanation. Old RVs make weird noises. The snow could be causing the roof to flex, creating sounds that seem like footsteps, and this storm will blow through by morning." I wanted to believe him. Marcus had always been the rational one in our relationship, the engineer who could explain away any mystery with physics and common sense. But as we prepared for bed, moving through our nighttime routine with forced normalcy, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us through the thin walls of our temporary home. The sounds stopped while we got ready for bed, but I could feel their absence like a held breath. Marcus brushed his teeth with the tiny bathroom door open, keeping up a stream of chatter about our plans for tomorrow, breaking camp early, maybe stopping at that antique shop in Huntsville we'd seen on the drive up, grabbing lunch somewhere with decent coffee and no strange noises. I changed into my pajamas and crawled into the RV's narrow bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. The pillows smelled like the rental company's industrial detergent, sharp and chemical. Through the bedroom window, I could see snow piling against the glass, and beyond it, the dark shapes of pine trees swaying in the wind. Marcus joined me a few minutes later, sliding under the covers and immediately pulling me close. His skin was warm, familiar, and for a moment I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. "It's going to be okay," he murmured against my hair. "Tomorrow we'll laugh about this, about how we got spooked by a snowstorm and some settling noises." But even as he said it, I could feel the rigid tension in his muscles, the way he kept glancing toward the ceiling. We lay there in the dark, listening to the wind and the soft hiss of snow against glass, and neither of us mentioned the fact that we'd both left our phones on the nightstand with the flashlight apps ready to activate. I must have dozed because I woke to the sound of Marcus's phone buzzing against the fake wood veneer of the nightstand. The display showed 3:06 a.m., and for a moment I couldn't remember where we were or why the bed felt so narrow. Then the music started. It was faint at first, barely audible above the wind, a melody that seemed to drift through the walls like smoke. A lullaby, sweet and simple, the kind of song you might hum to a sleepy child. But there was something wrong with it, something that made my skin crawl even as the tune lodged itself in my memory. Marcus was awake beside me, his breathing shallow and quick. "You hear that?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. The music was getting louder, or maybe closer, and I realized it was coming from outside, from the woods. "Stay here," Marcus whispered, but I was already sitting up, reaching for my robe. "If you're going, I'm going." We crept to the front of the RV, moving carefully in the dark. Marcus pulled back the driver's side curtain, and we both peered out into the night. The snow had stopped, leaving the world wrapped in white silence. Our campsite looked like a postcard, pristine drifts sculpted by the wind, pine boughs heavy with powder that gleamed in the moonlight. But the music continued, that sweet, wrong lullaby drifting through the trees. "There," Marcus breathed, pointing toward the tree line. At first I didn't see anything. Then my eyes adjusted, and I made out a figure standing just inside the woods. A woman, I thought, though it was hard to tell in the shadows. She was perfectly still, facing our RV, and the music seemed to be coming from her direction. "Is she singing?" I whispered. As if she'd heard me, the figure raised one hand, a gesture that might have been a wave or a beckoning. The lullaby grew louder, and I found myself leaning toward the window, my breath fogging the glass. "Sarah." Marcus's hand closed around my wrist. "Sarah, look at her feet." I looked down, following his gaze to where the woman stood. There were no footprints in the snow around her, none leading to her position, none disturbing the perfect white carpet of the forest floor. She was standing in knee-deep snow, as if she'd materialized there from thin air. The music stopped abruptly, cut off mid-note like someone had yanked the plug on a radio. The figure didn't move, didn't lower her hand, just stood there watching us through the darkness. "We need to go," I said. "Right now. We need to leave. Sarah, it's 3 a.m. There's 2 feet of snow out there, and we don't even know if the roads are passable." "I don't care. Marcus, that's not normal. People don't just appear in the woods in the middle of a snowstorm." But when I looked back toward the tree line, the figure was gone. No movement, no sound of retreat through the underbrush. Just empty forest and unmarked snow. We stood there for a long time, staring out into the night, waiting for her to reappear. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and I could taste copper in my mouth, the familiar flavor of fear that I'd been carrying for months, ever since the doctor had delivered his quiet news in that sterile white room. "Maybe it was just shadows," Marcus said eventually. "Tree branches moving in the wind, creating the illusion of a person. What about the music? Wind through the trees can make weird sounds, especially when it's cold like this. Always the engineer, always reaching for logical explanations. But I'd seen the way his hand shook as he let the curtain fall back into place. We returned to bed, but neither of us slept. We lay there in the dark, listening to every sound, the settling of the RV's frame, the whisper of wind through pine needles, the distant crack of tree branches heavy with snow. And underneath it all, so faint I might have imagined it, the echo of that lullaby playing over and over in my memory. At 3:06 the next morning, Marcus's phone buzzed again. This time, we both sat up immediately, already reaching for the flashlights we'd left within arm's reach. The music started before we were fully awake, the same lullaby, the same sweet wrongness that made my teeth ache. "It's the same time," Marcus said, staring at his phone's display. Exactly 3:06. I was already moving toward the window, but he caught my arm. "Don't look." "Why?" "Because I think she wants us to look." But I had to see. I pulled back the curtain just far enough to peer out with one eye, And there she was again. Same position, same pose, hand raised in that ambiguous gesture. Only this time she was closer, maybe 10 feet from the tree line, standing in our campsite itself. Still no footprints, still no disturbance in the snow. And now I could see her face. It was a woman's face, but wrong in ways I couldn't immediately identify. Too pale, maybe. Too still. Her eyes reflected the moonlight like an animal's, and her mouth was open as if she was singing, though the lullaby seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "She's closer," I whispered. Marcus pulled me away from the window. "Don't watch her. Don't give her what she wants." "How do you know what she wants?" "I don't. But every instinct I have is screaming at me not to look at her, not to listen to that music, not to let her see that we're afraid." The lullaby continued for exactly 3 minutes, then stopped with the same abrupt finality as the night before. When I dared to look again, the woman was gone, leaving only unmarked snow in the dark line of the forest. We didn't go back to bed. We sat at the dinette with cups of coffee that grew cold in our hands, watching the windows and jumping at every sound. When dawn finally came, gray and reluctant through the overcast sky, Marcus was already pulling on his coat. "I'm going to check the engine," he said. "Make sure everything's ready to go." I watched him through the windshield as he lifted the RV's hood and began his inspection. The morning light revealed a winter wonderland around our campsite. Snow-laden trees, pristine drifts, the kind of picture-perfect scene that belonged on Christmas cards. There was no sign that anyone had been there during the night. No footprints, no disturbed snow, nothing to suggest that we hadn't imagined the whole thing. But when Marcus came back inside, his face was grim. "The battery's dead," he said. "Stone cold dead. And Sarah, I don't think it died naturally." "What do you mean?" He held up a pair of wire cutters from his toolkit. "Someone cut the cables. Clean cuts, not corrosion or wear. Someone didn't want us to leave." I stared at the tool in his hand, my coffee cup trembling against the table. "That's impossible. We would have heard someone outside. The snow would have shown footprints. I know what I saw. The battery cables were cut with something sharp and precise, and there's something else." He paused, running his thumb along his wedding ring. "The spare battery in the emergency kit is missing." My breath came out in a small puff of vapor, and I realized the heater had stopped running. How long until the propane runs out? Without the battery to run the fans and ignition system? Maybe 6 hours. Less if we keep using the stove and hot water. I looked around our temporary home. The narrow galley kitchen, the cramped seating area, the thin walls that suddenly seemed more like a trap than shelter. "Can you fix the battery?" "Not without tools I don't have, and even if I could, we'd need to get to town to buy a replacement." "How far is town?" Marcus pulled out the map we'd used to navigate to the campground. His finger traced the thin line of road that led from Algonquin Provincial Park back to civilization. 12 miles, maybe 14. "We can walk that." "In 2 feet of snow?" "Sarah, it would take us most of the day, assuming the road is even passable. And if another storm hits..." He didn't need to finish. We both understood the math. 12 miles through snow and forest with no guarantee of rescue if something went wrong. Against that, we had a crippled RV with limited heat and enough food for maybe 3 days. "There has to be other campers," I said. "Other RVs, people with working vehicles." Marcus shook his head. "I walked the whole loop yesterday evening. We're the only ones here. The ranger said most people clear out by Labor Day." I felt the walls closing in, that familiar panic that had been my constant companion since the miscarriage. The sense that events were spiraling beyond my control, that the careful structure of my life was crumbling beneath my feet. So, what do? We conserve heat, ration the food, and hope someone comes looking for us. I paid for 3 nights when we checked in. If we don't show up to check out tomorrow, maybe the rangers will investigate. But even as he said it, I could see the doubt in his eyes. We were registered for a backcountry site, the kind of place people came to disappear for a while. How long would it take before anyone realized we were missing? The day passed with agonizing slowness. We bundled up in every piece of clothing we'd brought, huddling together on the narrow bed while the temperature inside the RV gradually dropped. Marcus rigged a system using our camp stove to provide some heat, but the small canisters of fuel wouldn't last long, and the confined space made me nervous about carbon monoxide. By afternoon, our breath was visible inside the RV and frost was forming on the windows. We took turns keeping watch, though I wasn't sure what we were watching for. The woman in the woods? Rangers coming to rescue us? Some sign that this was all a terrible dream? The forest remained silent and still, locked in winter's grip. No birds sang in the trees. No squirrels chattered among the branches. Even the wind had died to an occasional whisper that barely stirred the snow-laden pine boughs. "It's too quiet," I said, watching the sun sink toward the horizon with growing dread. Marcus looked up from the paperback thriller he'd been pretending to read. "What do you mean?" "Listen. Really listen. There's nothing. No wildlife sounds, no insects, nothing. It's like everything in the forest is hiding." We sat in silence for a moment, straining our ears. She was right. The absence of sound was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the RV's frame and the distant drip of melting snow. "Animals go quiet before storms," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. This storm already happened. They should be out foraging, looking for food. As if summoned by my words, a sound drifted through the trees, low and mournful, like wind through a broken pipe. But there was a rhythm to it, a deliberate cadence that made my skin crawl. "Wolves," Marcus suggested. But I'd heard wolves before on camping trips in Yellowstone and the Rockies. This was different, more structured, almost like a song, and it was getting closer. The sound came again, and this time I was sure it wasn't an animal. It was too controlled, too purposeful, like someone calling across a great distance, using their voice as an instrument. "She's back," I whispered. Marcus checked his phone. 5:47 p.m. "It's not time yet. She comes at 3:06. Maybe she's changing the schedule." The calling sound continued, weaving through the trees like smoke. Sometimes it seemed to come from the north, sometimes from the south, as if the source was moving in a wide circle around our campsite. And underneath it, so faint I might have imagined it, I could hear the echo of that familiar lullaby. Marcus stood up, moving carefully to avoid hitting his head on the low ceiling. "I'm going to try the radio, see if I can raise someone on the emergency frequency." He fiddled with the CB radio mounted near the driver's seat, adjusting dials and scanning through static. Nothing but white noise and the occasional burst of interference. Either we were too far from civilization, or something was blocking the signal. The calling stopped as abruptly as it had started, leaving us in the oppressive silence of the winter forest. But the quiet felt different now, expectant, like the pause before a thunderclap. "Marcus," I said quietly, "look outside." He moved to the passenger window and pulled back the curtain. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. But standing at the edge of our campsite, perfectly framed by 2 pine trees, was our visitor. She was closer than ever before, maybe 20 feet from the RV. Close enough that I could see she was wearing a white dress that should have been inadequate for the cold, but she showed no signs of discomfort. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her pale skin seemed to glow in the fading light. She was beautiful, I realized with a shock, not wrong or terrifying, but genuinely beautiful in a way that made my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't name. She looked young, maybe 25, with delicate features and eyes that seemed infinitely sad. "She's just standing there," Marcus murmured, "not moving, not making any sound." I found myself leaning forward, drawn to get a better look. There was something familiar about her face, something that tugged at my memory like a half-remembered dream. "Don't look at her," Marcus said sharply, but it was too late. Our eyes had already met through the glass, and I felt something shift inside my chest, a loosening, like the first crack in a dam. She smiled then, and raised her hand in that same gesture I'd seen before. But now I understood it wasn't a wave or a beckoning. She was pointing at me. The lullaby started again, but this time it was different. This time I could hear the words. Sleep now, little one. Dream of better days. When the snow melts away and the sun shows its face. Sleep now, little one. Let your worries fade. In the morning, you'll wake and the pain will have stayed. Sarah, Marcus's voice seemed to come from very far away. Sarah, close the curtain, but I couldn't move. The song was so beautiful, so sad, and it spoke to something deep inside me that had been broken for months. The part that had died in that sterile hospital room, the part that had been screaming silently ever since. Sleep now, little one, you've suffered so long. Let me take all your hurt, let me sing you this song. Sleep now, little one, you don't have to fight. Come and walk with me into the quiet night. She knows, I whispered. She knows about the baby. Marcus grabbed my shoulders, turning me away from the window. Sarah, that's not possible. That's not real. You're hypothermic. You're not thinking clearly. But I could feel tears freezing on my cheeks, and the woman's voice seemed to wrap around me like a warm blanket. She understood. She knew what it was like to lose something precious, to carry that emptiness inside you like a second heartbeat. I need to go to her, I said, standing up and moving toward the door. No. Marcus blocked my path, his face desperate. Sarah, please. That's not grief you're feeling. That's not healing. That's something else, something that wants to use your pain against you. You don't understand. She can help me. She can take it away. Take what away? The hurt, the guilt, all of it. I tried to push past him, but he caught my wrists. Sarah, listen to me. That thing out there isn't human. Humans leave footprints in snow. Humans don't appear and disappear like smoke. And humans don't sing lullabies that make you want to walk into a blizzard. The song was getting louder, more insistent, and I could feel it pulling at something fundamental inside me. The part that was tired of carrying this weight, tired of pretending I was okay, tired of seeing the disappointment in Marcus's eyes every time he looked at me. Let me go, I said, but my voice sounded strange, distant. I can't do that. Please, she's calling me. She's trying to kill you. The words hit me like cold water, breaking through the haze that had settled over my mind. I blinked, suddenly aware of how close I'd come to the door, how my hand had been reaching for the handle. Outside, the lullaby continued, but now I could hear the wrongness in it, the way certain notes lingered too long, the way the rhythm didn't quite match human breathing. And underneath it, almost subliminal, I caught the sound of something else, weeping. Not the clean sorrow of grief, but something broken and hungry. She's not trying to help me, I whispered. No, she's trying to feed on you, on your pain. I looked back toward the window and the woman was still there, still pointing, still singing. But now I could see the predator behind the beautiful face, the thing that had been waiting in these woods for someone like me to arrive, someone carrying enough sorrow to sustain it. What is she? Marcus pulled me away from the door, back toward the relative safety of the dinette. I don't know, but I think she's been here for a long time, waiting for people who are vulnerable, people who are hurting. The song began to fade, and I watched through the window as the woman slowly lowered her hand. For a moment, she looked almost disappointed. Then she smiled again, and this time there was nothing beautiful about it, just hunger and patience and the promise that she would try again. She turned and walked back toward the tree line, her white dress flowing behind her like mist. I watched until she disappeared among the pines, leaving no trace of her passage in the snow. Why didn't she come for you? I asked. You're hurting too. Marcus sat down beside me, his hand finding mine. Maybe she can only feed on certain kinds of pain. Or maybe she sensed that I'm not ready to give up yet. We spent the rest of the evening huddled together, sharing body heat and what little warmth we could coax from our camp stove. The temperature inside the RV continued to drop, and by midnight, ice was forming on the inside of the windows. We're not going to make it another night, Marcus said quietly. Not without heat. I knew he was right. We were already shivering constantly, and our fingers were becoming clumsy with cold. In a few hours, hypothermia would start to set in seriously, and then we'd be even more vulnerable to whatever was hunting us. Maybe we should try walking out, I suggested. In the morning, when we can see. 12 miles in snow this deep? We'd never make it. So, what's the alternative? Freeze to death while that thing picks us apart, piece by piece? Marcus didn't answer, but I could see him thinking, weighing our terrible options. Death by exposure on a forest road, or death by something that fed on sorrow and sang lullabies in the dark. At 3:06 a.m., his phone buzzed again. This time, we were ready. We'd moved away from the windows, wrapped ourselves in every blanket we could find, and tried to prepare for whatever was coming. But when the lullaby started, it was different again. Softer, sadder, with a new verse that made my breath catch in my throat. Sleep now, little ones, your time grows short. The cold is coming, and I know your sort. Sleep now, little ones, don't make me wait. Come to me freely, before it's too late. She knows we're dying, I whispered. She's been waiting for us to weaken, Marcus replied. Waiting for us to get desperate enough to come to her willingly. The song continued, and I found myself imagining what it would be like to step outside, to let the cold take me while that beautiful, terrible voice sang me to sleep. Would it hurt? Or would it be like sinking into warm water, letting go of all the pain and fear and guilt I'd been carrying? Sarah. Marcus's voice was sharp. Stay with me. I realized I'd been standing up, moving toward the door again. The lullaby had a hypnotic quality that seemed to bypass my conscious mind, speaking directly to the part of me that was tired of fighting. I'm okay, I said, but my voice sounded hollow. No, you're not. She's getting stronger, or we're getting weaker. Either way, we can't last much longer. Through the window, I could see her standing in our campsite again, closer than ever before. Maybe 10 feet from the RV door, close enough that I could see the details of her face, the way her lips moved as she sang, the hypnotic pattern of her breathing. She's beautiful, I said, and meant it. She's death. Maybe that's the same thing. Marcus grabbed my face, forcing me to look at him instead of the window. Sarah, listen to me. You are not going out there. I won't let you. You can't stop me forever. I can try. But we both knew it was a losing battle. Each night, the lullaby grew more compelling, more perfectly calibrated to my specific pain. And each night, we grew weaker, colder, more desperate for any kind of release. The song ended with its usual abruptness, and the woman faded back into the forest. But this time, she paused at the tree line and looked back, as if to say, soon. Dawn came gray and cold, with no sign of rescue. Marcus tried the radio again, scanning through all frequencies but found only static. Our food was running low, and the camp stove fuel was nearly exhausted. We have to make a choice, he said, looking haggard in the morning light. Try to walk out now, while we still have some strength, or wait for help that might never come. I stared out at the snow-covered road that led back to civilization, 12 miles through knee-deep drifts, with no guarantee that we'd make it even halfway before exhaustion or exposure claimed us. If we stay, she'll take me tonight, I said quietly. I can feel it. I'm not strong enough to resist much longer. Then we go. Right now, before we lose any more body heat. We packed quickly, taking only the essentials. Water, what little food remained, emergency blankets, our phones and flashlights. Everything else we left behind in the RV that had become our trap. The snow was deeper than it looked from inside, coming up to mid-thigh and making every step a struggle. But it was better than waiting to die. Better than giving in to that beautiful, hungry voice. We'd made it maybe a quarter mile when I heard it. Faint but unmistakable, drifting through the trees behind us. The lullaby. She's following us, I gasped, turning to look back down the road. But there was nothing there except our own tracks in the snow and the dark line of forest on either side. Keep walking, Marcus said, but I could hear the fear in his voice. The song grew louder as we struggled forward, and I began to hear new words, verses that seemed to know exactly how tired I was, how much my legs ached, how tempting it would be to just sit down in the snow and rest. Sleep now, little one. You've gone far enough. The road is so long, and the walking so rough. Sleep now, little one, lay down your head. In the soft, white snow, make a warm, white bed. My steps began to slow despite my best efforts. The snow felt like quicksand, pulling at my boots with each step. My breath came in sharp puffs that froze almost instantly, and ice was forming on my eyelashes. Sarah. Marcus grabbed my arm. Don't listen. Focus on my voice, not hers. But the lullaby was so much more compelling than his words. It understood me in a way he never could, understood the depth of my loss and the weight of my guilt. It offered peace, release, an end to the struggle that had defined my life for months. I need to rest, I said, looking longingly at a drift of snow beside the road that looked as soft as a featherbed. Not here. Not now. Sarah, look at me. I turned toward him, and the concern in his eyes cut through the fog in my mind like a blade. Marcus, my husband, my anchor, the man who'd held me while I sobbed in that hospital bed 3 months ago. He was real. His love was real. The thing singing behind us was not. Keep talking to me, I said, forcing my legs to move again. Don't let me listen to her. Remember our first apartment? He said, matching his pace to mine as we trudged through the snow. That tiny place above the bakery where we could smell fresh bread every morning? The radiator that clanked all night, I added, grateful for the memory. Something warm and human to hold on to. And how you insisted on painting the bedroom that awful shade of yellow. Sunshine burst, I corrected, and felt a ghost of a smile touch my lips. It was supposed to be cheerful. It was like living inside a highlighter. The lullaby continued behind us, but Marcus's voice was stronger now. More real than the hypnotic song, we walked and talked, sharing memories like breadcrumbs leading us home. Our wedding day, when it rained and we had to move the ceremony indoors. The time we got food poisoning from that sushi place and spent 3 days taking turns holding each other's hair back. Small moments, ordinary moments, the kind that build a life together. But as the day wore on and the sun climbed higher, our conversation began to lag. The snow was taking its toll, each step requiring enormous effort. My legs felt like lead, and despite the exertion, I was getting colder. The emergency blankets we'd wrapped around ourselves crackled with each movement, and my breath came in sharp, painful gasps. How far do you think we've come? I asked, pausing to lean against a snow-laden pine. Marcus checked his phone. Maybe 2 miles, 3 at most. 9 miles to go. The number felt impossible, a distance that might as well have been 900, and the lullaby was still there, weaving through the trees around us, sometimes fading to a whisper, sometimes swelling to fill the air with its seductive promise of rest. She's hurting us, I realized with growing horror, wearing us down, making us too tired to resist. Then we don't give her the satisfaction, Marcus said grimly. We keep moving, no matter what. But even as he said it, I could see the exhaustion in his face, the way his shoulders sagged with each step. We were both running on fumes, and the thing following us had infinite patience. The attack came without warning. One moment we were struggling forward through the snow, focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The next, something slammed into me from the side, knocking me off the road and into a deep drift beside a massive oak tree. I flailed in the snow, trying to orient myself, tasting blood where I'd bitten my tongue. Marcus! But when I looked back toward the road, he was gone. Not just missing, gone, as if he'd never been there at all. Our tracks led up to where I'd been standing, then stopped abruptly. No sign of a struggle, no indication of where he might have gone. Marcus! I screamed again, my voice echoing through the empty forest. The lullaby started immediately, closer than ever before, and I realized with dawning terror that this had been the plan all along. Separate us. Isolate me. Make me vulnerable to the voice that promised an end to all pain. Sleep now, little one. You're all alone. No one to help you. No way to get home. Sleep now, little one. Your journey is done. Come to my arms like a daughter, like a son. I struggled to my feet, snow falling from my clothes in heavy clumps. The forest around me looked different somehow. Older, darker, as if I'd fallen not just into a drift, but into some older version of these woods. The trees were taller, their branches forming a canopy so thick that almost no light reached the ground. "Where is he?" I called out. "What did you do with my husband?" The singing stopped, and in the sudden silence I heard footsteps approaching through the trees. Slow, deliberate steps that crunched softly in the snow. But these weren't the measured paces I'd heard on our roof. These were smaller, lighter, like a child's feet. A figure emerged from behind a cluster of pines, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a little girl, maybe 6 years old, with dark hair and pale skin, and eyes that were far too old for her face. She wore a white nightgown that should have been inadequate for the cold, but she showed no signs of discomfort. "Hello, Sarah," she said in a voice like wind chimes. "I've been waiting for you." I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You're not real. You're the same thing that was singing." The child smiled, and for a moment she flickered, her form wavering like heat shimmer. When she solidified again, she was closer, close enough that I could see the unnatural stillness of her chest, the way she didn't seem to breathe. "I'm whatever you need me to be," she said. "A mother, a sister, a daughter who never had the chance to grow up. Stop it. You know what I am, don't you, Sarah? You know why you can see me so clearly when your husband could barely make out my shape." I shook my head, but the truth was already crawling up my throat like bile. "No. I'm what you lost. What you carry inside you like a wound that won't heal. I'm the baby that never drew breath, the future that died before it could begin. You're not her." The words tore out of me in a raw scream. "You're not my daughter." "How do you know?" The child tilted her head, and for a heartbreaking moment she looked genuinely curious. "How do you know what she would have looked like? What she would have sounded like? How do you know this isn't exactly who she would have been?" I wanted to run, but my legs felt like water. The child was right. I had no idea what my daughter would have looked like, what kind of person she might have become. The miscarriage had happened so early that she'd never been more than a collection of cells, a possibility that died before it could become real. "You blame yourself," the child continued, stepping closer. "You think it was something you did? Something you ate or drank or thought? You think you killed me before I had a chance to live. The doctor said it wasn't my fault. But you don't believe him. You lie awake at night wondering if you exercised too hard, worked too much, wanted it too little. You wonder if your body rejected me because some part of you wasn't ready to be a mother." Each word was a knife between my ribs, perfectly placed to cause maximum damage. Because she was right, I did blame myself. Despite everything the doctors had told us about chromosomal abnormalities and random chance, I carried the guilt like a stone in my chest. "Come with me," the child said, holding out her hand. "Let me show you what could have been. Let me show you the life we would have shared." Her fingers were pale and small, perfect in every detail. A part of me, the part that had been screaming silently for months, wanted nothing more than to take that hand, to follow her into whatever dream or nightmare she offered. "Where's Marcus?" I asked instead. "Safe, sleeping in the snow, dreaming of summer days. He won't suffer. You killed him. I gave him peace, the same peace I'm offering you." I thought about my husband lying somewhere in the snow, his life slowly ebbing away while he dreamed of better times. The man who'd held me while I cried, who'd brought me tea every morning for 3 months while I recovered from the surgery, who'd planned this trip because he thought it might help us heal. "No," I said. The child's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around us. A subtle darkening, as if storm clouds were gathering overhead. "Sarah, you don't understand. This is the only way to stop the pain. This is the only way to be with me again. You're not my daughter. My daughter is gone, and pretending otherwise won't bring her back. I could be her. I could be exactly what you lost. But you're not." I took a step backward, then another. "You're something else. Something that feeds on grief and regret. You're a parasite." The child's face began to change, the innocent features melting like wax to reveal something ancient and hungry underneath. Her skin grew translucent, showing dark veins beneath, and her eyes became black pits that seemed to reflect my own despair back at me. "You can't run from me," she said, and her voice was no longer sweet. It was the sound of wind through empty graves, of ice cracking under sudden weight. "I am part of you now. I live in every moment of guilt, every flash of what if. I am the voice that whispers in the dark that you don't deserve happiness, that you don't deserve love, that you don't deserve to live when your daughter could not." I turned and ran. The forest seemed to shift around me as I fled, branches reaching out like grasping fingers, roots rising up to catch my feet. The snow grew deeper, pulling at my legs like quicksand, and the temperature dropped until each breath burned my lungs like acid. Behind me, I could hear the thing that had worn my daughter's face giving chase. Not running. It didn't need to run. It simply flowed through the trees like smoke, keeping pace with my panicked flight while its voice echoed from every direction. "You can't escape what you are," it called. "You can't outrun the truth." I stumbled, fell, picked myself up and kept running. My emergency blanket caught on a branch and tore away, leaving me in just my jacket and jeans. The cold bit through the fabric like teeth, and I could feel frostbite starting in my fingers and toes. But I kept moving, driven by something deeper than conscious thought. The same instinct that had made me fight in that hospital bed. The same stubborn refusal to give up that had gotten me through the darkest months of my life. I burst through a line of pine trees and found myself on the road again. Our tracks were still visible in the snow, leading back toward the RV and forward toward civilization. But there was something else, fresh footprints, larger than mine, heading in the same direction. Marcus was alive. I followed the prints, my heart lifting despite the exhaustion that made every step agony. The thing behind me was still calling, but its voice seemed fainter now, as if distance or determination was weakening its hold on me. The footprints led around a bend in the road, and there he was, my husband, stumbling through the snow with blood on his forehead and ice in his hair. He looked like he'd been through hell, but he was moving, and when he saw me, his face lit up with relief and joy. "Sarah. Thank God," I thought. He stopped, his expression changing to confusion. "How did you get ahead of me?" "What do you mean?" "I've been following your tracks for the last mile, but you're behind me now," and he looked down at the snow around his feet, then back at the trail he'd been following. "These aren't your prints." I looked too, and felt my blood turn to ice. The footprints Marcus had been following were small and delicate, like a child's feet. They led from somewhere deeper in the forest, converging with our original trail and then continuing forward toward the road. "It was leading you," I whispered, "drawing you deeper into the woods. Sarah, what the hell is going on?" Something hit me, knocked me unconscious, and when I woke up I was half a mile from where we'd been walking. I've been trying to catch up ever since. Before I could answer, the lullaby started again. But this time it wasn't coming from behind us. It was coming from ahead, from the direction of town. The thing had circled around, positioning itself between us and safety. "We need to get off the road," I said. "And go where?" "Sarah, we're in the middle of nowhere. It's below freezing, and we don't have proper gear for wilderness survival. Then we make our own way, through the forest, staying parallel to the road but out of sight." It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all we had left. We struck out into the trees, using the sun's position to maintain our heading while staying away from the obvious path. The going was harder. Deeper snow, fallen logs to climb over, branches that caught at our clothes, but at least we weren't walking into an obvious trap. The lullaby followed us, always seeming to come from just ahead, just out of sight. Sometimes I caught glimpses of movement between the trees, a flash of white fabric, a pale hand gesturing from the shadows. But the thing never showed itself fully, content to harry us like a wolf following wounded prey. Hours passed. The sun reached its zenith and began its descent toward the western horizon, and still we struggled forward through the snow. My feet were numb inside my boots, and I could no longer feel my fingertips. Marcus was in even worse shape. The blood on his forehead had frozen into a red crust, and he was moving with the mechanical precision of someone running on pure willpower. "How much farther?" I asked, though I knew he had no better idea than I did. Maybe 5 miles, maybe 10. I lost track when that thing knocked me out. We pushed on, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant death. Not just from the cold, but from the patient predator that stalked us through the trees. I could feel its attention like a weight on my shoulders, its hunger growing stronger as our strength ebbed. The sun was touching the treetops when we finally saw it, a thin column of smoke rising from somewhere ahead. A cabin, maybe, or another campsite. Signs of human life. There, Marcus breathed, pointing through the trees. We changed direction, angling toward the smoke with renewed energy. It might be nothing. A ranger station, an abandoned building, a chimney that led to an empty house. But it was something, and something was infinitely better than the endless forest that seemed to stretch in all directions. The lullaby grew louder as we approached the source of the smoke, and I realized with growing dread that this was another trap. The thing was hurting us again, using our desperation to draw us into whatever snare it had prepared. But we had no choice. We were too cold, too exhausted, too close to collapse to turn back now. The cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines that blocked most of the afternoon light. It was old, maybe a century old, with log walls and a stone chimney that leaked smoke into the gray sky. The windows were dark, and there was no sign of life except for the fire that someone had lit inside. "Hello?" Marcus called as we approached. "Is anyone there?" No answer. We circled the building, looking for signs of recent habitation. There were no fresh tracks in the snow, no parked vehicles, no indication that anyone had been here recently. But the fire was real. I could smell the wood smoke, see the heat shimmer rising from the chimney. Marcus tried the door. It was unlocked. "We shouldn't go in," I said, but even as I spoke I was moving toward the entrance. The promise of warmth was too powerful to resist. The interior was a single room with rough-hewn furniture and a stone fireplace where a fire crackled merrily. It looked like a ranger station or hunting cabin from an earlier era. No electricity, no modern conveniences, just the basics needed for shelter in the wilderness. But it was warm. Beautifully, wonderfully warm. We stripped off our wet clothes and hung them near the fire, then wrapped ourselves in a musty wool blanket we found in a trunk by the wall. For the first time in hours, I could feel my fingers and toes again. "This is too convenient," Marcus said, but he was already settling closer to the flames. "Abandoned cabin, fire already lit, exactly when we need it most." "I know, but what choice do we have? We were going to freeze out there. Maybe that's what it wants. Maybe this is how it feeds. Drawing people to shelter and then—" He didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. The cabin felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. Too clean, too well-maintained for a building that had clearly been abandoned for decades. And there was something else, a smell underneath the wood smoke that reminded me of old flowers and stagnant water. The lullaby started again as the sun disappeared behind the trees, but this time it was coming from inside the cabin, not from any specific direction. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, as if the building was singing. "We need to leave," I said, but my body betrayed me. The warmth had sapped what little strength I had left, and the thought of going back into the cold was almost unbearable. "Where?" Marcus asked. "We're miles from anywhere. It's getting dark and the temperature's dropping. We wouldn't last an hour out there." He was right, and we both knew it. We were trapped. By the cold, by our exhaustion, by the thing that had driven us to this place with the patience of a spider spinning its web. The lullaby grew louder, and I began to see shapes moving in the shadows at the edge of the firelight. Not quite human, not quite animal. Something in between that made my skin crawl. "Look at me," Marcus said urgently. "Don't watch the shadows. Focus on my voice." But it was getting harder to concentrate. The warmth, the exhaustion, the hypnotic rhythm of the song, they were all working together to pull me down into a dreamlike state where resistance seemed not just impossible, but pointless. "Tell me about the baby," I said suddenly. Marcus looked startled. "What?" "Tell me about our daughter, what she would have looked like, what we would have named her." Tell me about the life she would have lived. Sarah, I don't think... Please, I need to remember why I'm fighting this. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was soft and full of the same grief I carried. She would have had your eyes, he said. That particular shade of green that changes color depending on the light. And your stubborn streak. She would have been determined, headstrong, impossible to discourage once she set her mind to something. What would we have named her? Emma. We talked about Emma. The name hit me like a physical blow. We had talked about it, in those brief, hopeful weeks before everything went wrong. Emma Chen Rodriguez, a perfect blend of our families and cultures. She would have loved the outdoors, Marcus continued. Camping trips, hiking, maybe rock climbing when she got older. She would have been fearless, just like her mother. I felt tears freezing on my cheeks. She would have been real. She was real. For 12 weeks, she was the most real thing in our world. The shadows at the edge of the room began to take shape. Children's faces, pale and hungry, all staring at us with envious eyes. But I didn't look at them. I looked at Marcus, at the man who had loved me through the worst pain of my life, who was still here despite everything we'd lost. I want to live, I said, and meant it for the first time in months. The lullaby faltered just for a moment, and in that pause I heard something else, the distant sound of an engine. A snowplow or rescue vehicle, working its way up the mountain roads. Do you hear that? Marcus asked. The sound grew louder, and with it came the yellow glow of headlights cutting through the forest. Real lights, real help, real hope. The cabin began to shake around us, as if the building itself was angry at this interruption. The fire in the hearth guttered and went out, plunging us into darkness. But the engine sound was getting closer, and now I could hear voices, human voices, calling our names. Here, I screamed, jumping to my feet. We're here. The wall in front of me dissolved like mist, revealing the dark forest beyond. The cabin had been an illusion, a trap made of wishful thinking and desperation. We were still in the woods, still freezing, but we were alive, and the rescue team was almost upon us. Flashlight beams swept through the trees, and I heard someone shout, "Found them!" Rangers, I realized as they approached. A search and rescue team, complete with snowshoes and emergency gear. They wrapped us in thermal blankets and heated packs, checked our core temperatures, asked questions about our condition and how long we'd been lost. "Your RV," one of them explained as they helped us toward their tracked vehicle. "When you didn't check out this morning, we sent someone to investigate. Found your rig with the battery cables cut and no sign of where you'd gone. We've been searching since noon." As they loaded us into the warm rescue vehicle, I looked back into the forest one last time. There, standing just at the edge of the trees, was the child thing that had worn my daughter's face. She was no longer beautiful, just hungry and disappointed, cheated of her prey by the arrival of help. But as I watched, she smiled and raised her hand in that familiar gesture. Not a wave goodbye, but a promise. She would wait. She would be patient. And someday, someone else would come to these woods carrying the right kind of pain, the right kind of vulnerability. The rescue vehicle pulled away, carrying us toward warmth and safety in the long process of healing that still lay ahead. But I could hear the lullaby following us through the trees, growing fainter but never quite disappearing entirely. Marcus squeezed my hand as we reached the main road. "It's over," he said. But I knew better. Some things never really end. They just wait in the dark spaces between thoughts, in the quiet moments before sleep, in the woods where grief takes on flesh and walks among the living. The thing that had hunted us was still out there, still singing its beautiful, terrible song. And part of me, the part that had almost given in, almost taken that pale hand and followed it into the darkness, would always be listening. But today, I chose to live. Today, that was enough. Story 2. My name is Marcus Kellner. I'm 34, and I told myself to turn around at the Kisatchie National Forest, and someone else said no. The someone else was my own voice, but it came from behind me on the trail where nobody stood. I'd been hiking solo for 3 hours, working my way deeper into the Louisiana pine woods, when I heard it clear as daylight. Don't turn around now, Marcus. You're almost there. I spun around so fast my day pack shifted, nearly throwing me off balance. The trail stretched empty behind me, just red dirt and longleaf pines stabbing up into a pewter sky. No other hikers, no wildlife. Even the insects had gone quiet. I'd come to Kisachi to clear my head after the divorce papers were finalized. 3 months of lawyers and mediation had left me feeling like I was walking through someone else's life. Emma had kept the house, the dog, most of our friends. I got the RV and a stack of camping guides she'd bought me for Christmas 2 years ago, back when she still thought my weekend trips were cute instead of another way to avoid real conversations. The plan was simple. Park the Winnebago at the Wild Azalea Trail campground, take a day hike to stretch my legs, then spend the evening reading by the fire. Nothing complicated. Nothing that required talking to another human being. But standing there on the trail with my own voice echoing in my ears, I realized Kisachi had other plans. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, but the signal bars flickered between 1 and none. The trail map I'd picked up at the visitor center showed a straightforward 4-mile loop, but I'd been walking for nearly 2 hours and hadn't seen any of the landmarks mentioned in the brochure. No creek crossing, no old-growth pine grove, no scenic overlook. Just trees. Thousands of them, marching away in every direction like soldiers in formation. The smart thing would have been to turn around right then, follow my own footprints back to the parking area, fire up the RV, and find a different campground. Maybe somewhere with cell service and other people. Instead, I kept walking. The trail curved east, then south, winding between stands of young pine and patches of palmetto. My boots crunched on fallen needles and the occasional acorn. Everything looked the same. Trees, undergrowth, red dirt. I started counting my steps to track distance, but lost count somewhere around 800 when I noticed something odd. There were 2 sets of footprints in the dirt ahead of me. I knelt down to examine them. One set was clearly mine. Size 11 hiking boots with the distinctive diamond tread pattern of my Keens, but the other set was identical. Same size, same tread, same wear pattern on the heel. I sat back on my haunches, staring at the prints. There had to be an explanation. Maybe another hiker with the same boots had passed through earlier. It was possible, even if unlikely. Keen made thousands of pairs of these boots every year, but as I followed the 2 sets of prints with my eyes, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. The duplicate prints weren't older than mine. They were fresher. The edges were sharper, the dirt more recently disturbed, and they led forward along the trail in the direction I was heading. Someone wearing my exact boots had walked this path ahead of me. Recently, I stood up slowly, scanning the trees on both sides of the trail. Nothing moved except Spanish moss swaying in a breeze I couldn't feel. The silence pressed against my eardrums like water. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded thin and artificial. "Anyone out there?" No response, but somewhere ahead, I could swear I heard the soft crunch of footsteps on pine needles. I started walking again, faster now, trying to catch up to whoever was ahead of me. The duplicate footprints stayed with me step for step, always 10 or 15 feet ahead, always leading deeper into the forest. My rational mind cataloged reasonable explanations. A coincidence, someone playing a prank, a simple case of mistaken identity. But my primitive brain, the part that had kept my ancestors alive in darker times, was screaming warnings I couldn't ignore. The trail forked ahead. I consulted my map, but neither path was marked on the Park Service diagram. To the left, the trail climbed a low ridge covered in mature pines. To the right, it descended toward what looked like a creek bottom, thick with palmettos and vine-covered trees. The duplicate footprints went left. I went right. It was a test, I told myself. If someone was following me, copying my movements, they wouldn't expect me to deviate from their path. I'd circle around through the creek bottom, rejoin the main trail further ahead, and put this whole bizarre situation behind me. The right-hand path was barely more than a game trail, overgrown and poorly maintained. Thorny vines caught at my jacket. Palmetto fronds slapped at my legs. The canopy was thicker here, filtering the afternoon light to a greenish twilight that made everything look underwater. I walked for 20 minutes before I found the footprints again. They were waiting for me at a fallen log that blocked the trail, forced me to step around to the left. Fresh prints in the soft earth, still sharp-edged and clear. The same boots, the same gait, the same slight drag of the left heel that I'd developed after a hiking injury 3 years ago. My hands started shaking. I backtracked 50 yards and examined every inch of the trail I'd just walked. No other footprints. No side paths where someone could have intercepted my route. The duplicate tracks simply appeared at the fallen log as if someone had materialized out of thin air. Or as if I had walked this path before. But I hadn't. I was sure of it. I'd never been to Kisachi before today. I'd never walked this particular trail, never stepped around this particular log, never left these particular prints in this particular patch of earth. Yet there they were. I pulled out my phone again. Still no signal, but the GPS showed my location as a blue dot floating in a gray void. According to the device, I was standing in the middle of unmarked wilderness, miles from any established trail. The sun was getting lower. Through the trees, I could see the light taking on that golden quality that meant late afternoon. I'd been hiking for almost 4 hours, much longer than planned. The smart thing would be to head back to the RV while I still had daylight to navigate by. I turned around and started retracing my steps. The trail behind me was gone. I stood staring at a wall of palmetto and pine, thick and unbroken. No path, no opening, no indication that I'd just walked through this spot 5 minutes ago. I pushed through the undergrowth looking for the trail, but found only more trees and tangled vines. Panic fluttered in my chest like a trapped bird. I forced myself to think logically. Trails didn't just disappear. I'd gotten turned around somehow, confused about which direction I'd come from. It happened to hikers all the time. The solution was simple. Pick a direction and walk straight until I found familiar landmarks. I chose north, using my phone's compass to maintain a steady bearing. The forest floor was spongy with decades of fallen needles, quiet under my boots. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed once and fell silent. After an hour of bushwhacking, I found another trail. It was wider than the one I'd been following, better maintained, with wooden trail markers every few hundred yards. I consulted my map and decided this must be the main Wild Azalea Trail, the one that would lead me back to the parking area and my RV. The relief was overwhelming. I'd been letting my imagination run wild, spooked by a simple case of mistaken identity and poor navigation. In an hour, I'd be back at the campground with a beer and a campfire, laughing at my own paranoia. I started jogging, eager to make up time before dark. The first trail marker I passed was numbered 7. The second was numbered 6. I was going the right direction, counting down toward the trailhead. By the time I reached marker 3, I could see the parking area through the trees. My RV sat exactly where I'd left it, a white rectangle among the pines. I could see my camp chair unfolded beside the picnic table, my cooler in the shade, the blue tarp I'd strung between 2 trees to mark my territory. But there was something else. Another RV was parked in the campsite next to mine. Same make, same model, same color. Even from a distance, I could see it was identical to my Winnebago down to the last detail. The same scratch on the rear bumper from when I'd backed into Emma's fence. The same faded decal on the door from a national park I'd visited in Utah. My legs felt weak. I sat down on a fallen log and tried to process what I was seeing. There were 2 explanations. Either someone else owned a Winnebago identical to mine, complete with matching damage and decorations, or I was losing my mind. I walked closer, moving carefully through the trees at the edge of the camping area. As I got nearer, I could see more details. The duplicate RV's license plate was the same as mine, Louisiana plate 847 JKN. The magnetic spare key holder was attached to the same spot under the rear bumper. Even the camping gear scattered around the site was identical. Same Coleman cooler, same folding chair, same blue tarp. But my RV was still there too, 20 yards away in my original campsite. 2 identical RVs, 2 identical campsites, 2 identical sets of gear. I crept closer to the duplicate campsite, staying hidden behind a screen of palmettos. Through the RV's window, I could see movement inside. Someone was moving around in there, opening and closing cabinets, the same way I'd organized my supplies that morning. The door opened. I stepped out. Not someone who looked like me. Not a twin or a doppelganger or a stranger with a similar build. Me. Exactly me. Same clothes, same haircut, same 3-day stubble. Same hiking boots with the worn-down left heel. The duplicate Marcus walked to the picnic table and sat down in the folding chair. He pulled out a map. My map, the one I had in my backpack, and spread it on the table. He studied it for a few minutes, tracing routes with his finger the same way I always did when planning a hike. Then he looked up and stared directly at me. For a moment, neither of us moved. We looked at each other across 20 yards of pine forest, 2 identical men in an impossible situation. His expression was calm, almost amused. He raised one hand in a casual wave. I ran. I crashed through the palmetto thickets and pine saplings, not caring about the noise I made or the branches that whipped at my face. Behind me, I heard the duplicate Marcus call out in my own voice. "Marcus, wait up, we need to talk." But I didn't wait. I ran deeper into the forest, following deer trails and creek beds, putting as much distance as possible between myself and whatever was happening back at the campground. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but I didn't slow down until I was sure I wasn't being followed. When I finally stopped, I was in a different part of the forest entirely. Older trees, thicker canopy, different soil. I leaned against a massive pine trunk and tried to catch my breath while my mind raced through possibilities. Hallucination. That was the most likely explanation. Stress from the divorce, combined with isolation and too much time alone in my own head, had finally pushed me over the edge. I was having a complete psychotic break, seeing things that weren't there. But the alternative was worse, that what I'd seen was real. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but there was still no signal. The GPS showed my location as unknown. According to the device, I was nowhere at all. Night was falling fast. Through the canopy, I could see the first stars appearing in a clear sky. The temperature was dropping, and I was dressed for a day hike, not an overnight in the woods. I needed to find shelter, make a fire, figure out how to survive until morning. I started walking again, looking for a suitable campsite. The forest felt different at night. Sounds carried farther. The hoot of an owl. The rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. The distant crack of settling wood. But underneath it all was a deeper silence, as if the forest was holding its breath. I found a small clearing beside a creek, protected by a ring of mature pines. The ground was relatively level and covered with soft pine needles. I gathered firewood in the dying light and used my emergency lighter to start a small blaze. The fire pushed back the darkness and made me feel marginally more human. I had an energy bar and a bottle of water in my day pack, enough to get through the night if I was careful. In the morning, I'd find my way back to the parking area and deal with whatever was waiting there. But as I sat beside the fire, feeding it twigs and pine needles, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice water. Footsteps. Someone was walking through the forest toward my campsite. The steps were slow and deliberate, crushing pine needles with a familiar rhythm. I knew that walk. I'd been listening to it for 34 years. It was my walk. "Marcus?" The voice came from the darkness beyond the firelight. My voice speaking my name. "I know you're in there. We really need to talk." I grabbed a burning branch from the fire and held it like a torch. "Stay away from me. I'm not going to hurt you." The duplicate Marcus stepped into the circle of light, hands raised peacefully. Up close, the resemblance was even more unsettling. Every detail was perfect, from the small scar on my chin to the way my left eyebrow had a kink in it from an old hockey injury. "What are you?" I whispered. "I'm you," he said simply. "Or rather, I'm what you would have been if you'd made different choices. That's impossible." "Is it?" He sat down on the opposite side of the fire, uninvited. "Think about it, Marcus. Every decision creates a fork in the path. Every choice splits reality. Turn left instead of right. Say yes instead of no. Fight instead of walking away. You're not real. You're a hallucination. Then how do I know about Emma's affair? The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Her co-worker, Derek. The one she said was just a friend. It started 6 months before she asked for the divorce. You suspected, but you never confronted her about it. You were too afraid of what you might hear. I stared at him across the fire. How could you possibly know that? Because I am you. But I'm the version of you that followed her to that hotel in Shreveport. The version that kicked down the door and caught them together. The version that didn't just roll over and accept the lies. You're insane. Am I? Or are you finally seeing clearly? He leaned forward, his face orange in the firelight. Tell me, Marcus, when you were hiking today, did you ever feel like you'd been here before? Like you were following a path you'd already walked? I didn't answer, but he could see the recognition in my eyes. The footprints you found weren't from some other hiker, he continued. They were yours. From a different choice, a different timeline, a different you. The trails here don't follow geography, Marcus. They follow possibility. That's impossible, I repeated, but the words sounded hollow even to me. Is it more impossible than your wife sleeping with her co-worker for 6 months while you planned romantic dinners and bought anniversary gifts? Is it more impossible than losing half your life to someone who never loved you enough to be honest? I wanted to argue, to deny what he was saying, but the truth of it cut too deep. Emma had been distant for months before she asked for the divorce, working late, taking weekend trips with girlfriends, finding excuses to avoid intimacy. I'd noticed all the signs, but convinced myself I was being paranoid. What do you want? I asked. To show you something. He stood up and gestured toward the darkness beyond the fire. There's another trail out there, one that leads to a different ending. I'm not going anywhere with you. Yes, you are, because you know I'm telling the truth. You can feel it, can't you? The weight of all the choices you didn't make, all the words you didn't say, all the fights you didn't fight. He was right. I could feel it. A terrible, crushing sense of all the paths not taken. All the versions of myself I'd abandoned in favor of the safe choice, the easy choice, the choice that led to failure anyway. What's on this trail? I asked. Justice, he said. The kind you were too weak to take yourself. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I stood up. The fire crackled between us, casting wild shadows on the surrounding trees. In the distance, I could hear something moving through the forest. Other footsteps, other voices, other versions of myself converging on this point in space and time. How many are there? I whispered. As many as there are choices, he said. But tonight, only 2 matter. The you that you are, and the you that you could become. He turned and walked into the darkness. After a moment, I followed. The trail materialized under my feet as we walked, a faint path through the undergrowth that seemed to exist only when I was stepping on it. Behind us, the campfire faded until it was just an orange glow in the distance. Ahead, other lights flickered between the trees. More fires, more campsites, more versions of this same night playing out in infinite variation. We walked for what felt like hours, but could have been minutes. Time moved strangely here, stretching and compressing like taffy. The duplicate Marcus didn't speak, just led me deeper into the forest toward some destination I couldn't see. Finally, we emerged into a larger clearing. In the center stood a cabin I didn't recognize. Rough-hewn logs, a stone chimney, windows that glowed with warm yellow light. Smoke drifted from the chimney, and I could smell wood smoke and something else. Something that made my stomach turn. "What is this place?" I asked. "Home," he said. Or what it could have been. The cabin door opened and Emma stepped out. But it wasn't Emma. Not exactly. This version was harder somehow, with lines around her eyes I didn't recognize and a way of moving that suggested violence always close to the surface. She saw me and smiled. But it wasn't the smile I remembered from our wedding day or our anniversary dinners. This was something else entirely. "Hello, Marcus," she said. "I've been waiting for you." "This isn't real," I said. But the words had no power here. Real is relative, the duplicate Marcus said. What matters is choice. And tonight, you get to choose what's real. Emma, or the thing wearing Emma's face, walked toward me. In her hand, she carried something that caught the light from the cabin windows. Something metal and sharp. "I'm sorry about Derek," she said conversationally. "I know it hurt you when you found out, but pain is just another choice, isn't it? You can choose to carry it, or you can choose to let it go." "How do I let it go?" I heard myself ask. "By taking it back," the duplicate Marcus said. "By making the choice you were too afraid to make. By being the man you should have been instead of the victim you chose to become." Emma handed me the knife. It was heavier than I expected, the handle warm as if it had been held recently. The blade was clean and sharp, reflecting the firelight like a mirror. In its surface, I could see my own face looking back. Not the broken, defeated face I'd been wearing for months, but something harder, something capable of action. "She's not real," I said. "Neither are you," the duplicate Marcus replied. "Neither am I. We're all just choices, Marcus. Possibilities. The question is, which possibility do you want to become?" I looked at the knife in my hand, then at Emma's face, beautiful and cruel and utterly unrepentant. Behind her, the cabin windows pulsed with warm light, promising comfort and resolution and an end to the pain that had been eating me alive for months. All I had to do was choose. "No," I said, and let the knife fall to the ground. The sound it made hitting the earth was like breaking glass. The clearing shuddered. The lights flickered, and for a moment I saw through the illusion to what lay beneath. Not a cabin, but a pile of rotting logs. Not Emma, but something else entirely. Something that had been wearing her face like a mask. The duplicate Marcus snarled, his features shifting and blurring. "You're weak," he said. "Just like you've always been. That's why she left you. That's why everyone leaves you." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm still me." The forest around us began to collapse, the trees folding in on themselves like cardboard props. The trail beneath my feet crumbled away, leaving me standing on nothing. But instead of falling, I felt myself being pulled backward, yanked through space and time toward something bright and real and true. I woke up in my sleeping bag inside my RV, dawn light filtering through the windows. My head pounded and my mouth tasted like copper. Outside, I could hear the normal sounds of a forest coming alive. Birds singing, wind in the trees, the distant hum of traffic on the highway. I sat up slowly, checking my watch. 6:30 a.m. I'd slept for nearly 12 hours, but I felt like I hadn't slept at all. The memories of the night before came flooding back. The duplicate footprints, the other RV, the trail that led nowhere and everywhere. I got dressed and stepped outside. My campsite looked exactly as I'd left it the previous morning. No duplicate RV. No evidence of other campers. Just my gear scattered around the picnic table and the cold ashes of yesterday's fire. But on the table, beside my map, lay something that hadn't been there before. A hiking boot. Size 11. Keen brand. With a worn-down left heel and a distinctive diamond tread pattern. I picked it up and compared it to the boot on my left foot. Identical in every way, except for one detail that made my blood run cold. This boot was covered in fresh dirt. Red dirt from a trail I'd never walked, mixed with something else. Something that looked like dried blood. I dropped the boot and backed away from the table. In the distance, I could hear other campers starting their day. The slam of RV doors, the hiss of camp stoves, the chatter of early morning conversation. Normal sounds from a normal world where choices didn't split reality and trails didn't lead to impossible places. But I knew the truth now. I'd seen what lay beneath the surface of things. The dark possibilities that lurked at the edges of every decision. And I knew that somewhere out there, in the space between choice and consequence, other versions of myself were still walking those trails. Still choosing. Still becoming what I'd been too weak or too wise to become myself. I packed up my campsite in record time and drove away from Kisatchie National Forest without looking back. But I could feel them watching me go. All the other Marcuses, all the other choices, all the other endings that might have been. And late at night, when the road stretched empty ahead of me and the radio played nothing but static, I could swear I heard my own voice calling from the darkness, telling me it wasn't too late to turn around, to go back, to choose differently. But I kept driving. I'm still driving. And I'll never stop, because I know what's waiting for me if I do. Story 3. My name is Marcus. I'm 34, and I came to the Bridger-Teton National Forest in Wyoming to forget that 3 months ago, my daughter Emma would have turned 8. The Forest Service road had been rougher than expected, jarring my 28-foot Winnebago until my coffee mug rattled against the cup holder like chattering teeth. By the time I reached the dispersed camping area near Granite Creek, the sun was already bleeding orange through the lodgepole pines, and I was exhausted from fighting both the steering wheel and my own thoughts. I'd been living in the RV for 6 weeks now, ever since Sarah asked me to move out. She said she needed space to grieve properly, that my presence was a constant reminder of what we'd lost. Maybe she was right. Maybe watching me stare at Emma's empty bedroom every morning was harder than being alone. The divorce papers were sitting on my kitchen table back in Denver, unsigned but inevitable. The campsite was perfect in its isolation, a small clearing surrounded by dense forest, with Granite Creek babbling somewhere in the darkness beyond the trees. No cell service, no other campers, just me and the weight of silence I'd been carrying since the accident. I leveled the RV, connected the propane, and tried not to think about how Emma used to help me with these tasks, always insisting she could do it herself. That first night I sat outside with a beer and watched the fire crackle, listening to the forest settle around me. An owl called from somewhere deep in the trees, and something larger rustled through the underbrush. Normal sounds, comforting even. I'd been a city kid growing up, but Emma had loved camping. She would have been fascinated by every sound, every shadow, demanding to know what made each noise. I finished my beer and was heading inside when I noticed something odd. There, just at the edge of my LED lantern's reach, was a wooden sign I hadn't seen when I'd set up camp. It was weathered and gray, like it had been there for decades, with white painted letters that seemed to glow in the darkness. Home, 2.3 miles, with an arrow pointing into the forest. Strange. I'd studied the trail maps before coming here, and there was no established trail in that direction. Just dense forest for miles. But the sign looked official, with the kind of carved lettering you'd see on Forest Service markers. I made a mental note to investigate in the morning and went inside. The RV felt smaller at night, and the familiar sounds of the road seemed amplified in the stillness. The refrigerator hummed, the water heater clicked on and off, and somewhere in the walls, something ticked with mechanical precision. I tried to read, but my eyes kept drifting to the window above the dinette, expecting to see that sign glowing in the darkness. Around midnight I heard footsteps. Not the soft pad of an animal, but the deliberate crunch of boots on pine needles and dry leaves. They circled the RV once, slowly, then stopped directly outside my bedroom window. I held my breath, listening, but heard nothing else. When I finally worked up the courage to peer through the blinds, I saw only empty forest. I didn't sleep well that night. Every sound made me tense, and I found myself thinking about Emma more than usual. About the morning I'd found her bedroom empty, her window open, her footprints leading into the woods behind our house. The search had lasted 4 days before they found her body in a creek 2 miles away. The official cause was accidental drowning, but I'd never understood how she'd gotten so far from home, or why she'd left in the first place. Morning brought blessed sunlight and the rational comfort of daylight. I made coffee and stepped outside to examine the sign more closely. In the harsh light of day, it looked even older and more weathered than I'd remembered. The wood was gray and split in places, and someone had carved initials into the post. EM 2024. My blood went cold. Emma Marie. Those were Emma's initials. But that was impossible. Emma had died 3 months ago, and she'd never been to Wyoming. I told myself it was a coincidence. EM could be anyone. Emily Martin, Eric Morrison, Edmund Marshall. but my hands were shaking as I poured my second cup of coffee and I couldn't stop staring at those carved letters. The day grew overcast and humid, unusual for September in Wyoming. I tried to distract myself with routine maintenance on the RV, checking the tires, cleaning the awning, testing the slide-out mechanisms. But my eyes kept drifting to that sign, and by afternoon, curiosity had overwhelmed my unease. I packed a day pack with water, snacks, and my GPS unit, then followed the arrow's direction into the forest. The trail was faint but visible, just a narrow path through the trees, marked occasionally by small cairns of stacked stones. It wound through dense pine forest, crossed two small streams, and gradually began to climb. After about an hour of hiking, I checked my GPS. According to the device, I'd traveled exactly 2.3 miles from the RV, and there, in a small clearing ahead, was a house. It wasn't what I'd expected. Not a ranger station or an old hunting cabin, but a two-story Victorian home that looked like it had been transplanted from a Denver suburb. White clapboard siding, green shutters, a wraparound porch with a swing. It was the kind of house Emma had always said she wanted when she grew up. The yard was perfectly maintained, with flower beds full of late-season blooms and a white picket fence that gleamed like it had been painted yesterday. Smoke rose from the chimney, and warm yellow light glowed in the windows. It was the most normal thing I'd ever seen, and somehow that made it terrifying. I approached slowly, my hiking boots loud on the gravel path. A porch light flickered on as I climbed the front steps, and I could hear music playing inside, something soft and classical that I almost recognized. I raised my hand to knock, then froze. There, hanging beside the front door, was a wooden sign, "The Morrison Family." Below that, in smaller letters, Emma, Sarah, and Marcus. My knees went weak. I grabbed the porch railing for support, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was impossible. This couldn't be real. But there it was, in neat white letters. Our family name, our first names, arranged as if we lived here together. The front door opened before I could knock. "Daddy!" Emma stood in the doorway wearing the same purple dress she'd been buried in. She looked exactly as I remembered. 8 years old with Sarah's dark hair and my blue eyes, that gap-toothed smile that had always melted my heart. She was barefoot, and her dress was clean and pressed, like she'd just gotten ready for church. "Emma!" My voice came out as a whisper. She ran to me, throwing her arms around my waist with the same enthusiastic hug she'd given me every day after school. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and something else. Something cold and earthy that made my stomach turn. "I knew you'd find me, Daddy. I've been waiting so long." She looked up at me with those bright blue eyes, but something was wrong with them. They didn't blink. Not once. "Emma, how are you here? You died, sweetheart. You died 3 months ago." She tilted her head, confused. "Died? I'm not dead, Daddy. I'm home. We're all home now." She took my hand, her fingers were ice cold, and tugged me toward the door. "Come on, Mommy's making dinner. She'll be so happy to see you." I let her lead me inside, my mind struggling to process what was happening. The house was perfect, like a magazine spread. Hardwood floors, antique furniture, family photos covering every surface. But the photos were wrong. They showed our family in places we'd never been, doing things we'd never done. Emma riding a bike she'd never owned. Sarah and me at our wedding, except we'd been married in a small ceremony at City Hall, not the elaborate church wedding shown in the photo. "Sarah," I called out. "In the kitchen," came her voice, warm and familiar. I found her at the stove, stirring something that smelled like beef stew. She turned and smiled, and my heart broke all over again. She looked exactly as she had on our wedding day. Beautiful, radiant, unmarked by the grief that had hollowed her out these past months. "You're just in time for dinner," she said, rising on her toes to kiss my cheek. Her lips were as cold as Emma's fingers. I was starting to worry you'd gotten lost. "Sarah, what is this place? How are you here? How is Emma here?" She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "What do you mean? This is our home, Marcus. This is where we live, where we've always lived." She gestured around the kitchen, and I noticed more wrongness. The appliances were too old, like something from the 1950s. The calendar on the wall showed October 1952. But Emma died, I said desperately. You asked me to move out. We're getting divorced. Sarah's smile never wavered, but something flickered behind her eyes. Oh, Marcus, you're having those dreams again. The bad dreams where we're not together. Dr. Patterson said they might continue for a while, but the medicine should help. She opened a cabinet and pulled out a prescription bottle. The label was too faded to read, but I could see pills inside, small and white, like the antidepressants Sarah had tried to get me to take after Emma's death. I don't understand, I whispered. Emma tugged on my sleeve. Daddy, will you read to me after dinner? I have a new book. It's about a little girl who gets lost in the woods and finds her way home. I looked down at her, and for a moment the illusion cracked. Her skin was pale and waxy, like someone had tried to paint life onto a porcelain doll. And her eyes, those blue eyes I'd inherited, were completely black. I need some air, I said, backing toward the door. Marcus, dinner's almost ready, Sarah called after me. I stumbled outside onto the porch, gasping. The sun was setting, but it was setting in the wrong direction. North instead of west. And the shadows it cast were wrong too. They moved independently of the trees that should have cast them, writhing and reaching toward the house like grasping fingers. I pulled out my GPS unit, hands shaking. The screen was blank. I tried turning it off and on again, but nothing happened. The device was dead, though it had been fully charged when I left the RV. A hand touched my shoulder and I spun around. Emma stood behind me, still smiling that unchanging smile. Are you okay, Daddy? You look scared. Emma, we need to leave. This isn't real. You can't be here. Her head tilted again, and when she spoke, her voice had a hollow quality, like an echo in an empty room. But this is home, Daddy. This is where we belong. All of us, together forever. Behind her, through the kitchen window, I could see Sarah setting the table for 3. She was humming something I recognized, the lullaby she used to sing to Emma before bed. But the tune was wrong, discordant, like a music box winding down. I have to go, I said, stepping off the porch. But you just got here, Emma said, following me. And dinner's ready. Mommy made your favorite. I was walking faster now, heading back toward the trail. Emma's footsteps kept pace behind me, never seeming to hurry but somehow matching my speed exactly. Daddy, wait, don't leave us again. I turned back one last time. The house was still there, warm and inviting, with smoke curling from the chimney and Sarah's silhouette moving in the kitchen window. But now I could see other shapes moving inside. Dark figures that shouldn't be there, pressing against the glass like trapped insects. I'm sorry, I whispered, then ran. The trail back to the RV seemed longer than before, winding through terrain I didn't remember. The forest had grown darker and denser, and the temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees. My breath came out in visible puffs, and frost was forming on the pine needles despite the fact that it had been nearly 70 degrees that afternoon. Behind me, I could hear Emma calling, Daddy, Daddy, come back, we miss you. But her voice was growing distorted, less human with each call. By the time I reached the first stream crossing, it sounded more like the cry of a wounded animal than a little girl. I stumbled through the forest for what felt like hours. Every time I thought I was close to the RV, the trail would veer off in a new direction. The cairns that had marked the path were gone, replaced by what looked like small sculptures made of animal bones and twisted wire. And always behind me, I could hear Emma calling. When I finally saw the glow of my LED lantern in the distance, I nearly wept with relief. The RV sat exactly where I'd left it, looking impossibly normal and safe in its small clearing. I ran the last 100 yards and threw myself inside, slamming the door and engaging all 3 locks. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial Sarah's number on my satellite phone. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Her voice, warm and alive and real, nearly broke me. Sarah, it's me. I know you don't want to talk, but something's happening here. I'm in Wyoming, and I saw Emma. I know that sounds crazy, but I saw her, and I saw you, but it wasn't really you. There's something wrong with this place. I'm leaving in the morning, driving straight home. I love you. I'm sorry about everything." I hung up and tried to calm my racing heart. Outside, the forest was silent. No owl calls, no rustling in the underbrush. Even the creek had gone quiet. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, like the forest was holding its breath. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat at the dinette, trying to make sense of what had happened. Hallucination seemed like the most rational explanation. I'd been under tremendous stress, barely sleeping, drinking too much. It wouldn't be the first time grief had made someone see things that weren't there, but the sign was still there. I could see it through the window, that weathered wooden post with its impossible message. Home, 2.3 miles. And carved into the wood, those initials that matched my dead daughter's name. Around midnight, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they didn't circle the RV. They walked straight to the door and stopped. I held my breath waiting for a knock that never came. Instead, I heard Emma's voice, muffled by the door, but unmistakably hers. "Daddy? Are you in there? I'm cold, Daddy. Can I come in?" I pressed my back against the opposite wall, my heart hammering. "You're not Emma. Emma is dead. I'm not dead, Daddy. I'm just lost. I've been lost for so long, but now I found you. Please let me in. I'm scared." Her voice was different now, younger, more frightened. The voice of a child who was truly lost and afraid. It was the voice I'd imagined in my worst moments, wondering what Emma's last minutes had been like, whether she'd called for me, whether she'd been scared. "Daddy, please. There are things in the woods. Bad things. They want to hurt me." My hand moved toward the door locks before I caught myself. This wasn't Emma. It couldn't be. But the voice was so perfect, so heartbreakingly familiar. "Daddy, I can hear them coming. Please, please let me in." I covered my ears, but I could still hear her sobbing. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, not just from outside the door, but from the walls, the ceiling, inside my own head. "Stop," I whispered. "Please stop." The sobbing cut off abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it felt like being buried alive. Then, barely audible, I heard Emma's voice one more time. But now it was different. Cold, hollow, completely empty of emotion. "We're waiting for you, Daddy. At home. We'll always be waiting." The footsteps retreated, but I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine running, ready to flee at the first sign of movement outside. But the forest remained still and silent until dawn. As soon as there was enough light to see, I began breaking camp. I was folding up the awning when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. There, in the soft dirt around the RV, were footprints. Small ones, the size an 8-year-old girl might make. They circled the RV 3 times, then headed off into the forest in the direction of the sign. I followed them for about 50 feet, my heart pounding. They led to a large pine tree, then simply stopped. There were no other tracks, no sign of where the person who made them had gone. It was as if they'd simply vanished into thin air. When I turned to go back to the RV, I saw something carved into the bark of the tree. Fresh cuts, the sap still bleeding. "Come home, Daddy. We miss you." I ran back to the RV and finished packing in record time. But as I was securing the last of my gear, I noticed the sign had changed. Where it had once pointed into the forest, the arrow now pointed directly at my RV. And the distance had changed too. Home, 0.0 miles. I didn't wait to see what that meant. I climbed into the driver's seat, threw the transmission into drive, and gunned it down the Forest Service road as fast as the RV could safely go. In my rearview mirror, I could see the sign growing smaller, but it never disappeared entirely. Even when it should have been out of sight, I could still make out that white arrow, pointing in my direction. The drive back to civilization felt endless. My GPS remained dead, and every road I took seemed to loop back on itself. I passed the same landmarks over and over: a distinctive rock formation, a lightning-struck tree, a rusted-out pickup truck abandoned on the shoulder. Each time I passed them, they looked a little different, a little more decayed, a little more wrong. It wasn't until I reached the highway that my GPS flickered back to life. According to the device, I'd been driving in circles for 6 hours, but I'd only covered 12 miles. The gas gauge showed I should have been running on fumes, but the tank was still 3/4 full. I drove straight through to Denver, stopping only for gas and coffee. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that house in the woods. Emma in her purple dress, Sarah humming that discordant lullaby, the family photos showing a life we'd never lived. When I finally reached my apartment, I found a package waiting by the door. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single photograph. Our family standing in front of that impossible house, all of us smiling. Emma was holding a sign that read, "Welcome home, Daddy." On the back, in Emma's careful 8-year-old handwriting, "We're waiting. Love, Emma and Mommy." I burned the photograph and threw the ashes in the dumpster behind my building. But that night, I dreamed of the house again. In the dream, I was sitting at the kitchen table while Sarah served dinner, and Emma told me about her day at school. It was peaceful, perfect, everything I'd lost when Emma died. When I woke up, there was dirt under my fingernails. That was 6 months ago. I've tried to move on, tried to rebuild my life. Sarah and I started talking again, went to couples counseling, even signed new divorce papers. Ones that called off the divorce instead of finalizing it. We're trying to heal together, to find a way forward that honors Emma's memory without being consumed by it. But every night, I dream of that house. And every morning, I wake up with dirt under my nails and the taste of pine needles in my mouth. My GPS mysteriously shows routes to places I've never been, all of them leading back to Wyoming, back to Granite Creek. Back to a trail that ends at a house that shouldn't exist. Sometimes when I'm driving home from work or grocery shopping, I'll take a wrong turn and find myself on a road I don't recognize. A road that always seems to be heading west, toward the mountains, toward a place where a wooden sign promises that home is only 2.3 miles away. Sarah doesn't know about the dreams or about the packages that sometimes appear on our doorstep. More photographs, all showing our family in that impossible house. Emma getting older in each one, growing up in a place where the dead don't stay dead and love doesn't let go. In the latest photograph, Emma looks about 12. She's standing in front of the house, waving at the camera. Sarah is beside her, one hand on Emma's shoulder, the other pointing toward something outside the frame. Both of them are smiling, but their eyes are completely black. Written on the back, in Sarah's handwriting this time. The door is always open. I've tried throwing the photographs away, burning them, burying them in the backyard, but they always come back. And each time, Emma looks a little older, and the message on the back grows more insistent. Come home. We miss you. You belong with us. Forever. Last week, I found a new sign on my route to work. Not the weathered wooden marker from the forest, but a green highway sign, official and clean. Wyoming state line, 247 miles. It wasn't there the day before, and when I drove past the same spot on my way home, it was gone. But I can feel it calling to me. That house in the woods where my family waits with endless patience and empty eyes. Where love has curdled into something hungry and desperate. Something that won't let the dead rest or the living move on. I've started packing a bag, just in case. Water, snacks, camping gear. Sarah thinks I'm planning another solo trip to clear my head. She doesn't know I've been studying maps of Wyoming, looking for roads that lead to Granite Creek, looking for a way back to a place I never should have found. Because the truth is, I want to go back. Despite everything I know about that place, despite the wrongness and the horror and the impossible reality of it all, I want to see Emma again. I want to hold her, even if she's cold. I want to hear Sarah's voice, even if it's hollow and strange. I want to go home, even if home isn't really home anymore. The latest photograph arrived this morning. In this one, Emma looks about 16. She's standing at the end of the gravel path, right where the forest meets the yard. She's not smiling anymore. She's pointing directly at the camera, and her mouth is open as if she's calling to someone just out of sight. On the back, in my own handwriting, though I don't remember writing it, are 2 words: "Come home." I've been staring at those words for 3 hours now. My hands are shaking, and there's dirt under my fingernails even though I haven't been outside today. In the distance, I can hear what sounds like a little girl calling for her daddy. The bag is packed. The car is gassed up. Sarah is at work and she won't be home until 6. It's only 2 o'clock. I think I have time to make the drive. Story 4. My name is Marcus. I'm 34. And I came to the Bridger-Teton National Forest in Wyoming to forget a birthday and remembered everything. The RV rental place in Jackson had warned me about the late October weather, but I'd driven the winding mountain roads anyway, past the skeletal aspens and into the deep pines where the shadows pooled like black water between the trees. I wasn't supposed to be alone. Sarah should have been with me, sharing the cramped dinette and laughing at my attempts to level the ancient Winnebago on the uneven campsite. But Sarah was spending her 28th birthday in a hospital bed in Denver, and I was here trying to pretend that the last 6 months hadn't happened. The campground host, a weathered man named Dale with nicotine-stained fingers and eyes like chips of flint, had pointed me toward Site 47 at the far end of the loop. "Quiet back there," he'd said, scratching his gray beard. "Most folks prefer to stay closer to the facilities." I'd thanked him and driven deeper into the forest where the cell service died and the silence pressed against the RV's aluminum walls like something alive. I'd been camping alone for 3 days when I found the tooth. It was Tuesday morning, October 29th. I remember because I'd been marking days on the calendar Sarah had bought me, crossing them off like a countdown to something I couldn't name. The temperature had dropped overnight, leaving frost on the picnic table and turning my breath into small clouds that dissipated quickly in the thin mountain air. I'd slept poorly, woken by sounds I told myself were just the forest settling. Branches creaking, pine cones falling, the distant howl of what might have been coyotes. I was pulling on my hiking boots, the same Merrells I'd worn on dozens of trails with Sarah, when my sock caught on something sharp inside the left boot. I reached in, expecting maybe a pebble or a broken piece of the insole, and my fingers closed around something small and hard and wrong. It was a tooth, human by the look of it. One of the big molars from the back of someone's mouth, still slick with something that might have been saliva. The root was intact, ragged where it had been torn from the gum, and there were dark stains along the edges that I didn't want to think about too hard. I dropped it immediately, watched it bounce off the RV's linoleum floor and roll under the dinette table. My hands were shaking as I checked the boot again, running my fingers along every inch of the interior. Nothing else, just the lingering smell of copper and something organic that made my stomach turn. The logical part of my brain, the part that had spent 10 years as a software engineer, the part that believed in rational explanations, tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was an animal tooth. Maybe a bear or a mountain lion. Maybe some other camper had lost it, and it had somehow found its way into my boot. Maybe I was losing my mind from grief and altitude and too many nights alone with my thoughts. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd felt. I spent 20 minutes searching under the dinette, moving the fold-out table and checking every corner where the tooth might have rolled. It was gone, as if it had never existed at all, as if the forest had swallowed it back up. I should have packed up right then, should have cranked down the stabilizers and driven back to civilization, back to hospitals and parking meters and the comfortable illusion of safety that comes with being surrounded by other people. Instead, I made coffee and told myself I was being ridiculous. Grief did strange things to people. Sarah would have laughed at me, would have found some perfectly reasonable explanation for a tooth in my boot. She always could make sense of things I couldn't. The day passed quietly. I hiked the Taggart Lake Trail, a moderate 3-mile loop that wound through aspen groves and opened onto views of the Teton Range. The physical exertion felt good, burned away some of the anxiety that had been building since I'd found the tooth. I saw other hikers, a retired couple from Minnesota, a group of college kids with expensive gear and loud voices. Normal people doing normal things. By the time I made it back to the RV as the sun was setting behind the mountains, I'd almost convinced myself the whole thing had been my imagination. That night, I cooked pasta on the propane stove and tried to read a paperback thriller Sarah had picked out before everything changed. But the words kept blurring together, and I found myself listening to the sounds outside. The whisper of wind through pine needles, the crack of settling timber, the distant cry of an owl. At some point, I dozed off in the booth, my head pillowed on my arms. I woke to the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps circling the RV. Not the quick patter of a small animal or the heavy crash of something large moving through the underbrush. These were measured, patient, almost human in their rhythm. Step, pause, step, pause, as if someone was walking around my campsite and studying every angle. I held my breath and listened. The footsteps continued their circuit. Past the door, along the driver's side, around the back where my bike was locked to the rear bumper, up the passenger side. They paused at each window, and I imagined someone, or something, pressing their face against the glass, peering through the thin curtains at the man curled up in the dinette booth. The logical thing would have been to look outside, to turn on the exterior lights and see what was out there. But something primitive in my brain, some ancient survival instinct, told me to stay still and quiet and small. Prey animals freeze when predators are near. I had become a prey animal. The footsteps completed their circuit and stopped at the door. I heard a soft scratching sound, like fingernails dragging across aluminum. Then nothing. I stayed frozen for what felt like hours, until my legs cramped and my neck ached from the awkward angle. Eventually, I crept to the driver's seat and turned on the headlights. The beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty campsite, the picnic table, the fire ring where I'd burned a few logs earlier that evening. Nothing moved. Nothing watched me back. But when I finally worked up the courage to step outside with a flashlight, I found the footprints. They circled the RV exactly as I'd imagined, pressed deep into the soft pine duff. But they weren't human prints. They were wrong somehow. Too long, with what looked like claw marks at the toes. And they were bare, as if whatever had made them wasn't wearing shoes. I followed the trail to where it disappeared into the tree line, my flashlight beam dancing nervously over the dark spaces between the pines. At the edge of the camp, I found something else. A small pile of what looked like bones, arranged in a neat circle around a patch of disturbed earth. Most were too small to identify, probably from rabbits or squirrels, but there were a few larger ones that might have come from a deer or a person. I backed away from the bone circle and retreated to the RV, locking the door behind me even though I knew it wouldn't stop anything that really wanted to get in. The rest of the night passed in a haze of dozing and starting awake, of checking the windows and listening for sounds that might or might not have been there. When morning came, gray and cold with the threat of snow in the air, I found another tooth in my boot. This one was different, smaller, sharper, with a curved root that suggested it had come from the front of someone's mouth. It was cleaner than the first one, as if it had been scrubbed, but there were still dark stains along the enamel that made my skin crawl. I didn't drop this one. I held it up to the light streaming through the RV's windows and studied it, trying to understand what it meant, trying to understand what was happening to me. That's when I heard the voice. Marcus. It came from outside, soft and familiar. A woman's voice, pitched low and intimate, the way Sarah used to say my name when she wanted my attention. "Marcus, are you in there?" I moved to the window and peered through the curtains. There was a figure standing at the edge of my campsite, barely visible in the gray morning light, tall and thin, wearing what looked like a hospital gown that fluttered in the breeze. The figure raised one hand and waved, and even though I couldn't see the face clearly, I knew that gesture. I'd seen it 1,000 times. "Sarah?" I whispered. The figure turned and walked into the forest. Without thinking, I yanked open the door and followed. "Sarah, wait!" I crashed through the underbrush in my socks, branches whipping at my face and pine needles catching in my hair. The figure stayed just ahead of me, always at the edge of my vision, leading me deeper into the woods. I called her name over and over, but she never answered, never looked back. I don't know how far I followed her. The forest closed around me like a green tunnel, and the sounds of the campground faded until all I could hear was my own labored breathing and the crunch of pine needles under my feet. The trees grew thicker, older, their trunks scarred with deep gouges that looked almost like claw marks. When I finally stopped, lungs burning from the altitude and exertion, the figure was gone. I stood alone in a small clearing where the canopy opened up enough to let in a gray circle of sky. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind. Even my breathing seemed muffled, as if the air itself was thick and wrong. That's when I noticed the trees. Every pine around the clearing had been marked with the same symbol, a rough circle carved deep into the bark, with lines radiating out like the legs of a spider. The cuts were fresh, weeping sap that had hardened into amber tears. And in the center of each circle someone had pressed something small and white into the wound. Teeth. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, embedded in the living wood like horrible pearls. I backed toward what I hoped was the way I'd come, but the forest looked the same in every direction. The trees pressed close, their marked trunks seeming to lean inward, and I realized with growing panic that I had no idea which way led back to the campground. I picked a direction and started walking, trying to stay calm, trying to remember the survival techniques Sarah and I had learned during our backpacking phase. Find a stream and follow it downstream. Look for signs of human activity. Don't panic. But there were no streams here. No signs of humanity beyond the terrible symbols carved into every tree. And the panic was rising in my chest like black water, threatening to drown what was left of my rational mind. I walked for hours, or what felt like hours. The gray light never changed, never grew brighter or dimmer, as if time itself had stopped in this place. My socks were shredded, my feet bleeding, but I kept moving because stopping meant admitting I was lost, and admitting I was lost meant accepting that I might never make it out. When I finally saw the RV, sitting exactly where I'd left it in campsite 47, I nearly cried with relief. I limped across the clearing and collapsed on the steps, pulling out pine needles and checking my cuts. My phone had no signal. Hadn't had signal since I'd entered the forest, but the digital clock read 3:47 p.m. I'd been gone for 6 hours. That night, I didn't even pretend to try sleeping. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine running and the headlights on, ready to drive out of here at the first sign of trouble. But the trouble didn't come from outside, it came from my boots. At 2:13 a.m., I heard a soft, clinking sound from the back of the RV, like small stones being dropped into a glass jar. I turned around and saw my hiking boots sitting where I'd left them by the door. The sound came again. Clink, clink. I approached the boots slowly, flashlight in hand, and peered inside. The left boot was full of teeth, maybe 20 or 30 of them, piled up like loose change. Molars and incisors and canines, some still bloody at the roots, others worn smooth as river stones. They shifted and clinked against each other as I watched, settling into new arrangements. I dumped them out onto the floor, and they scattered across the linoleum like dice. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see that some of them were fresh, still slick with saliva and blood. Others looked ancient, yellowed with age and worn down to nubs. But they were all human, every single one. I swept them up with a dustpan and threw them outside, but when I checked the boots again, they were full. I dumped them out and they refilled. I threw the boots themselves into the forest, and when I woke up from a brief, exhausted doze, they were back by the door, full of teeth. By dawn, I was crying. Not the quiet tears of grief I'd been carrying for months, but the raw, ugly sobs of someone who had reached the absolute limit of what they could endure. I sat on the floor of the RV surrounded by scattered teeth and wondered if this was what a complete breakdown felt like. That's when I heard the engines. 2 pickup trucks were coming up the campground road, moving fast and raising clouds of dust. I stumbled outside to meet them, hope flaring in my chest for the first time in days. Dale, the campground host, climbed out of the first truck along with 2 men I didn't recognize. Local types with weathered faces and serious expressions. "Mr. Chen?" Dale's voice was careful, professional. "We need to ask you some questions." The questions came in a rush. How long had I been here? Had I seen anyone else in the area? Had I noticed anything unusual? The two men with Dale introduced themselves as sheriff's deputies, and they kept glancing at each other in a way that made my stomach clench. "There's been an incident," one of them explained. "Some hikers found remains about 2 miles from here. Human remains. They wouldn't tell me details, but I caught fragments as they talked among themselves. A family of 4 from Colorado. Missing for 3 weeks. What was left had been scattered across a quarter-mile area, picked clean by scavengers. The thing is," Dale said, studying my face carefully, "we found some of their gear, backpacks, camping equipment, and there's something else." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a single tooth, a human molar with dark stains along the root. "We found about 50 of these scattered around the remains," he said. "Forensics says they don't match the victims. They're from other people. Lots of other people." I stared at the bag, my vision blurring at the edges. The tooth looked exactly like the ones that had been filling my boots, but I couldn't make my mouth form the words to tell them that. "Mr. Chen, are you all right?" I wasn't all right. I would never be all right again. But I nodded and answered their questions as best I could, telling them about the strange sounds and the footprints, but leaving out the teeth. Leaving out the voice that had sounded like Sarah's. Leaving out the forest that had tried to swallow me whole. They searched my RV, of course, went through every cabinet and drawer and storage compartment with the methodical thoroughness of professionals. They found nothing unusual, no teeth, no evidence of violence, no sign that I was anything more than a grieving man who had come to the mountains to escape his problems. When they finished, Dale walked me to my truck while the deputies continued their investigation. "You should probably head back to town," he said quietly. "This area's going to be crawling with law enforcement for the next few weeks." I wanted to argue, to explain that I couldn't leave, that something in these woods had claimed me and wouldn't let me go. But the words died in my throat when I saw the expression on his face, the careful, professional mask of someone who had seen too much and believed too little. I packed up the RV in 20 minutes, throwing clothes and gear into bags with shaking hands. As I was cranking up the stabilizers, I caught movement in my peripheral vision and turned to see a figure standing at the tree line. It was Sarah, or something wearing Sarah's face, dressed in the same hospital gown I'd followed into the forest. She smiled and waved, and I could see that her mouth was full of gaps where teeth should have been. I started the engine and drove away without looking back. The road down from the mountain seemed longer than I remembered, full of switchbacks and drop-offs that made my hands sweat on the steering wheel. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see something following me, but there was nothing except empty asphalt and the receding bulk of the Tetons. I made it as far as Jackson before I had to stop. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel, and my vision kept blurring with tears I didn't remember crying. I pulled into a truck stop and sat in the parking lot for an hour, engine running, trying to convince myself that I was safe. That's when I felt something shift in my left boot. I pulled it off with trembling fingers and turned it upside down. 3 teeth fell onto the truck stop asphalt. 2 molars and a canine, still damp with something I didn't want to identify. As I watched, they began to roll across the pavement toward the RV, as if drawn by some invisible force. I climbed back into the driver's seat and kept driving. The teeth followed me home to Denver. They appeared in my shoes, in my coffee cup, in the pockets of jackets I hadn't worn in months. I threw them away, flushed them down the toilet, burned them in the fireplace, but they always came back. Sometimes there were just 1 or 2, other times my boots would be full to overflowing. I tried to research what had happened, spent hours on obscure websites reading about wendigos and skinwalkers and other things that supposedly haunted the mountain forests. But the stories never quite matched what I had experienced. This felt older somehow, more patient, like something that had been waiting in those woods for a very long time. Sarah died on November 15th, exactly 18 days after I found the first tooth. I was holding her hand when it happened, watching the monitors flatline while machines that had been keeping her alive finally gave up. The cancer had spread faster than anyone expected, the doctors said. There was nothing more they could do. At the funeral, her mother gave me a small jewelry box that Sarah had asked her to save for me. Inside was Sarah's engagement ring, the one I'd given her 3 years ago before the diagnosis, before everything changed. And underneath the ring, nestled in the velvet lining, was a single tooth. It was one of Sarah's molars, the one the dentist had pulled just before she started chemotherapy. She'd kept it all this time, a strange souvenir of the battle she'd been fighting. But now it felt like something else, a message, or maybe a warning. That night, for the first time since leaving the mountains, my boots were empty. I thought it was over. I thought whatever had been following me had finally gotten what it wanted. But 2 weeks later, I found a tooth in my morning coffee, small and sharp, with a root that curved like a fishhook. It wasn't one of Sarah's teeth, wasn't one of mine. It belonged to someone else, someone I'd never met, would never meet. I still find them sometimes, even now. In my shoes, in my pockets, in places where teeth should never be. Each one is different, came from a different person, told a different story of loss and pain and endings. I've started keeping them in a glass jar on my kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker and the bills I keep forgetting to pay. The jar is almost full now. Sometimes, late at night when the city is quiet and my apartment feels too small, I take out the teeth and arrange them on my kitchen table. Molars and incisors and canines, yellow and white and brown, each one a piece of someone who is gone. I try to imagine their stories, their lives, their final moments in those dark woods where something patient and hungry waits for travelers who have lost their way. I think about going back sometimes. The idea comes to me when I'm driving past the mountains on my way to work, or when I see an RV pulled over at a rest stop with out-of-state plates. I think about driving up into the Bridger-Teton National Forest, past the skeletal aspens and into the deep pines where the shadows pool like black water. I think about finding that clearing again, the one where every tree is marked with symbols and embedded with teeth. I think about the figure in the hospital gown who wore Sarah's face and smiled with gaps where her teeth should have been. Most of all, I think about the sound of footsteps circling in the dark, patient and measured, waiting for me to understand what I had become, what I am becoming. Because the teeth aren't just appearing anymore. They're growing. Small white buds that push through my gums when I sleep. Extra molars that don't belong in any human mouth. My dentist says it's impossible, that teeth don't regenerate like that. But every morning there are more. And every morning, when I check my boots before putting them on, I find new additions to my collection. Teeth that are still warm, still slick with saliva from mouths I will never see. I know what it means now. I understand what happened in those woods, what followed me home, what has been changing me one tooth at a time. I am becoming something that waits in the forest for lost travelers, something that collects pieces of the people who wander too far from the light. The jar on my counter is almost full, and when it overflows, I think I'll have to go back. Back to the mountains, back to the clearing where the trees are marked with symbols and embedded with the remnants of everyone who came before me. Sarah is waiting for me there, I think, or something wearing her face, standing at the edge of the forest in a hospital gown that flutters in the mountain wind. She'll smile when she sees me, gaps in her teeth like missing puzzle pieces, and she'll lead me deeper into the woods where time stops and the silence has weight. Maybe that's where I belong now. Maybe that's where I've always belonged. The jar is almost full, and my mouth aches with new growth, and somewhere in the mountains of Wyoming something patient circles an empty campsite in the dark, waiting for the next lost soul to find their way to Site 47. I check my boots every morning, and every morning they tell me the same thing. It's almost time to go home. Story 5. My name is Marcus. I'm 34, and I should have known something was wrong with the Pisgah National Forest the moment my sister Claire stepped out of our RV with that smile. Too wide, too eager, like she was meeting an old friend instead of arriving at a campground we'd never seen before. We'd driven down from Charlotte in my beat-up Winnebago, the one Dad left me when he died 3 years ago. Claire had been struggling since her divorce, barely eating, barely sleeping, so I'd suggested a long weekend in the mountains. Get some air, I'd said. Clear your head. The kind of meaningless comfort people offer when they don't know what else to say. The campground sat in a hollow between ridges, surrounded by towering oaks and maples just starting to turn. Late September in North Carolina, when the air carries that first bite of winter. I'd picked this spot because it was remote. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, just us in the woods. Claire needed quiet, I thought. She needed peace. I was backing the RV into our site when I noticed her standing perfectly still beside the picnic table, staring into the tree line. Not looking at anything in particular, just staring with that strange smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Claire," I called, switching off the engine. "You okay?" She turned toward me, and for just a second, I didn't recognize her. The smile was wrong somehow. Too practiced, like she'd been rehearsing it. But then she blinked, and it was just Claire again, my little sister with her messy brown hair and worried eyes. "Sorry," she said, shaking her head. "Just taking it all in. It's beautiful here." I looked where she'd been staring. Dense woods, nothing more, but something about the shadows between the trees made my skin crawl, like the forest was watching us back. "Yeah," I said, grabbing our bags from the cab. "Beautiful." We spent the afternoon setting up camp. Claire seemed more relaxed than she had in months, moving with an energy I hadn't seen since before her marriage fell apart. She helped me level the RV, arranged our few supplies in the tiny kitchenette, even hummed while she worked, something she never did anymore. "Remember when Dad used to take us camping?" she asked, hanging our jackets in the narrow closet. "Up at Lake James?" I remembered. "Every summer until I turned 16 and decided I was too cool for family trips. Dad would rent the same cabin, the one with the screened porch and the view of the water. Claire would spend hours skipping stones while I sulked and read comic books. You were always better at building fires than me," I said. She laughed, and it sounded normal. Almost normal. "Want me to get one started outside?" "Sure, I'll heat up some soup." I watched through the window as she knelt by the fire ring, arranging kindling with careful precision. She'd always been methodical, but this was different. She placed each piece of wood like it mattered, like she was following some pattern I couldn't see. When she struck the match, the fire caught immediately, too quickly, burning with an odd blue tinge before settling into normal orange flames. "Weird," I muttered, stirring our dinner. "Must be the wood." Claire came back inside as the sun began to set, her cheeks flushed from the cool air. We ate quietly, the only sounds our spoons against the bowls and the whisper of wind through the trees outside. "Marcus," she said suddenly, setting down her soup, "do you ever feel like you're becoming someone else?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Like there's another version of yourself, waiting. And sometimes you can feel it moving underneath your skin." I studied her face in the dim light of the RV's overhead bulb. She looked serious, almost fevered. "Claire, are you feeling okay? You seem different since we got here." "Different how?" "I don't know. I guess more like yourself, before everything happened with Tom." She nodded slowly. "Maybe this place is good for me. Maybe I'm finally becoming who I'm supposed to be." Something in her tone made me uneasy, but I couldn't put my finger on what. We finished eating in silence, then stepped outside to sit by the fire. The flames had died down to glowing embers, but Claire added more wood without being asked. The fire leaped higher, casting dancing shadows on the trees around our site. "Tell me about the divorce," I said. It was something we'd never really talked about. She just called one day to say Tom was gone and she needed to stay with me for a while. Claire stared into the flames. "He said I was changing, that I wasn't the person he married anymore. People do change. That's not always bad." "No," she agreed. "Sometimes it's necessary." A branch snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond our fire's reach. We both looked toward the sound, but saw nothing. The forest felt dense and alive around us, full of rustling leaves and distant animal calls. "We should probably head inside soon," I said. "It's getting cold." But Claire didn't move. She kept staring at the tree line, that strange smile returning to her face. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I listened. Wind in the leaves, the settling pops of our fire, an owl hooting somewhere in the distance. "Hear what?" "Nothing," she said after a moment. "Never mind." We banked the fire and went inside. The RV felt cramped after sitting under the open sky, the narrow hallway barely wide enough for us to pass each other. Claire took the convertible dinette bed while I climbed into the overcab sleeping area. "Good night, Marcus," she called softly. "Night, Claire. Try to get some sleep." I lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the forest. Somewhere in the distance I could hear running water, probably the creek marked on our campground map. Closer, there were the soft sounds of small animals moving through the underbrush. Normal sounds, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching our RV from the darkness outside. I must have dozed off eventually, because I woke to the sound of the RV door opening. According to my watch, it was just past 3 in the morning. I lay still, listening, wondering if Claire had gone outside to use the bathroom. But the door didn't close again. "Claire," I whispered. No answer. I climbed down from the sleeping area and looked toward the dinette. The bed was empty, sheets tangled like she'd left in a hurry. The door hung open, letting in cold night air and the smell of damp earth. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. Our campfire had burned down to ash, but there was enough moonlight to see our immediate area. Claire was nowhere in sight. "Claire!" I called, louder this time. "Where are you?" My voice echoed off the surrounding hills, but there was no response. I played the flashlight beam across the campsite, looking for any sign of where she might have gone. Near the edge of the clearing, I found her footprints in the soft dirt, bare feet heading into the woods. I ducked back into the RV to grab shoes and a jacket, my heart hammering against my ribs. Why would she go into the forest barefoot in the middle of the night? This wasn't like her. Claire was cautious, practical. She'd never do something so reckless. The trail of footprints led past our fire ring and into a gap between 2 large oaks. I followed them with my flashlight, calling her name every few steps. The beam picked up broken twigs and disturbed leaves, signs of someone moving quickly through the underbrush. After about 50 yards, the footprints stopped. I swept the light in a wide circle looking for any indication of which direction she'd gone. But the forest floor was a carpet of fallen leaves that showed no clear tracks. It was like she'd simply vanished. "Claire!" I shouted, panic creeping into my voice. "This isn't funny. Where are you?" Something moved in the trees to my left. A rustling of branches, too large to be a squirrel or bird. I turned the flashlight toward the sound, but saw only shadows and the pale trunks of birch trees. "Claire, is that you?" The rustling stopped. The forest went completely quiet, as if every living thing was holding its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause, leaving an unnatural stillness that made my ears ring. Then I heard it, a low humming sound, barely audible, coming from deeper in the woods. It was a tune I almost recognized, something Claire used to sing when we were kids. But it was wrong somehow, the melody twisted and strange. I followed the sound, pushing through tangles of mountain laurel and stepping over fallen logs. The humming grew louder, more distinct, definitely Claire's voice, but altered in a way that made my skin crawl. It echoed strangely among the trees, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. I'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when I saw the light ahead. Not electric light, but the warm glow of flames. I hurried toward it, relief flooding through me. She'd built another fire, probably just couldn't sleep and needed some air. There was a logical explanation for all of this, but when I reached the clearing, my relief died in my throat. There was a fire, yes. A perfect circle of stones with flames leaping higher than any campfire should burn. And there was Claire, standing with her back to me on the far side of the blaze. She was completely naked, her pale skin seeming to glow in the firelight. "Claire," I called, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. "What are you doing?" She didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge me at all. She just kept humming that twisted melody while she swayed slightly from side to side. I could see her shoulder blades moving under her skin, rolling and shifting in a way that didn't look quite human. I took a step closer, and that's when I saw what was scattered around the fire's perimeter. Bones. Small ones, rabbits, squirrels, maybe birds. They were arranged in careful patterns, forming symbols I didn't recognize but that filled me with instinctive dread. "Claire, we need to go back to the RV," I said, louder this time. "It's cold out here. You're going to get sick." Finally, she stopped humming, stopped swaying. For a long moment, she stood perfectly still while the fire cast dancing shadows across her back. Then she turned around. Her face was the same, but different. The features were Claire's. Same nose, same eyes, same mouth. But they were arranged wrong somehow, like a photograph that had been torn apart and reassembled by someone who'd never seen a human face before. Her smile was too wide, stretching almost to her ears. Her eyes reflected the firelight like an animal's. "Hello, Marcus," she said, and her voice was Claire's voice, but flatter, emotionless. "I was wondering when you'd find me." I took an involuntary step backward. "Claire, what's wrong with you? What is this place?" She tilted her head to one side, the gesture bird-like and unsettling. "Nothing's wrong. I'm becoming what I'm supposed to be, what I've always been underneath. This isn't you. Something's happened to you." "Oh, but it is me," she said, taking a step around the fire toward me. "This is who I really am, who I've been trying to be my whole life." Tom could see it happening. That's why he left. He was afraid of what I was becoming. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like lead. This wasn't my sister. Couldn't be my sister, but it looked like her, sounded like her. Knew things only she would know. "The forest called to me," she continued, moving closer with that inhuman smile fixed on her face. "It's been calling for months, ever since the divorce. Telling me to come home, to stop pretending to be something I'm not. Claire, please, you're scaring me. Let's go back to the RV and we can talk about this." She laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "The RV? That metal box where you want to keep me trapped? Where you want to keep me human?" She shook her head. "I don't think so." I noticed movement in my peripheral vision and turned to see shapes emerging from the trees around the clearing. At first I thought they were people, but as they stepped into the firelight I realized my mistake. They had human-like forms, but wrong proportions. Arms too long, torsos stretched, faces that were almost familiar but subtly malformed. They moved with the same bird-like mannerisms as Claire, tilting their heads and watching me with reflecting eyes. "My new family," Claire said, gesturing to the creatures surrounding us. "They've been waiting for me to fully change, to let go of what I used to be." "Change into what?" I whispered. She spread her arms wide, and I saw that her fingers had grown longer, the nails extending into black claws. Her skin seemed to ripple and shift in the firelight as if something was moving underneath it. "Something better," she said. "Something free." One of the creatures stepped forward, and I recognized with horror that it had once been human. I could see the remnants of a face I almost knew. Features that might have belonged to a missing hiker or camper who'd wandered into these woods and never come out. "Don't be afraid, Marcus," Claire said, and now her voice had a strange harmonic quality, like multiple people speaking in unison. "It doesn't hurt. Well, not for long." I broke from my paralysis and ran. Crashing through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes and face, I heard them giving chase behind me. But they weren't running. They were gliding through the trees like smoke, keeping pace with me effortlessly while making that same twisted humming sound Claire had been making. I had no idea which direction led back to the campground. In my panic, I'd lost all sense of orientation. I just kept running, praying I'd find something familiar, some landmark that would guide me home. Behind me, Claire's voice called out, "You can't run forever, Marcus. The forest is big, but not that big, and I know these woods now. They're part of me." I stumbled over a fallen log and went down hard, skinning my palms on the rough bark. When I looked back, I could see lights moving through the trees. Not flashlights, but the same strange glow that had surrounded Claire's fire. They were getting closer. I scrambled to my feet and kept running, my lungs burning with the effort. Somewhere ahead, I caught a glimpse of artificial light, the security lamp from the campground's central building. I ran toward it like a drowning man swimming for shore. The RV sat where we'd left it, looking reassuringly normal in the dim light. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the lock. Behind me, I could hear the humming getting closer, harmonizing in impossible ways that made my teeth ache. I got the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it behind me and engaging every lock I could find. Then I ran to the driver's seat and started the engine, not bothering to unhook the power or water connections. I just wanted to get away from this place, away from whatever Claire had become. As I backed out of the campsite, my headlight swept across the tree line. For just a moment, I saw them. Claire and her new family standing at the edge of the clearing. They weren't pursuing anymore, just watching with those reflecting eyes as I fled. Claire raised one elongated hand in what might have been a wave goodbye, or maybe a promise that we'd see each other again. I drove through the night, not stopping until I reached the interstate. Even then, I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see something following me. But there was nothing except empty road and the occasional set of headlights from other late-night travelers. It's been 3 weeks since that night in the Pisgah National Forest. I reported Claire missing to the authorities, told them she'd wandered off during the night and I couldn't find her. Search teams combed the area for days but found no trace of her. No footprints, no torn clothing, nothing. It was like she'd simply vanished. But I know better. She didn't vanish. She changed, became something else, something that belongs in those dark woods where normal rules don't apply. I've been having dreams about her, dreams where she visits me in the middle of the night, standing at the foot of my bed with that too wide smile and those reflecting eyes. In the dreams, she tells me I can't run forever, that eventually I'll have to come back, that the forest is patient, but it always gets what it wants in the end. I wake up with scratches on my arms that I don't remember getting. Sometimes I find dirt under my fingernails, even though I haven't been gardening. And yesterday, I caught myself humming that twisted melody she'd been singing by the fire. I'm changing too. I can feel it happening slowly, like water wearing away stone. Whatever infected Claire that night in the woods, it's in me now too, growing stronger, whispering to me when I'm alone. Part of me wants to fight it, to find a doctor or priest or someone who might be able to help. But another part, a part that gets stronger every day, wonders if Claire was right. Maybe this is who I'm supposed to be. Maybe I've been pretending to be human my whole life, just like she was. The dreams are getting more vivid, more real. Last night, I dreamed I was walking through the forest, my feet bare on the cold ground, following that same twisted melody deeper into the darkness. And when I woke up, there were leaves in my bed. I think I'm going to go back soon. Back to the Pisgah National Forest. Back to that clearing where my sister found her true self. I'll drive the same route, park in the same campsite, and wait for her to call me home. I'm scared of what I'll become, but I'm more scared of fighting it any longer. After all, like Claire said, sometimes change is necessary, and the forest is waiting.